Tonight we're breaking down every legendary Pokémon mystery. This is a fascinating topic, but I'll keep my narration calm to ensure you can still drift off to sleep. Thank you to those of you who've been joining us consistently. If you're falling asleep with us tonight, let me know in the comments how many nights in a row you've been here. And if this is your first night, just comment night 1. Now back to the video. Imagine standing at the very edge of the world, where the ocean meets the horizon and the sky seems to stretch into an infinite, silent void. In the world of Pokémon, that horizon isn't just a geographic boundary. It is a veil thin enough to touch, separating our reality from forces so ancient and so vast that the human mind can barely comprehend them. For decades, we have traveled through these regions, from the grassy fields of Kanto to the crystal-scarred depths of Paldea, catching and battling the creatures that inhabit them. But among the hundreds of species we know, there exists a tier of being that defies the standard laws of biology and evolution. These are the legendaries. They are not merely rare or powerful. They are the architects of the universe, the guardians of the elements, and the living scars of ancient wars. Yet, despite their prominence in every history book and regional myth, they remain the greatest enigmas in the franchise. Them on box art, we use them in battle, but do we truly understand what they are? The mystery begins with a singular, chilling realization: the Pokémon world as we know it should not exist. By all accounts of physics and natural selection, the delicate balance required for life to flourish on this planet is a statistical impossibility. The land and the sea are in a constant, latent state of war. Time and space are not fixed constants, but fluid dimensions that can be warped or shattered by a single thought. Even the very concept of death is governed by entities that roam the skies and the shadows. Every time a trainer steps out into the tall grass, they're walking upon a world that is being actively held together by the will of these titans. We call them Pokémon because we catch them in spheres and give them nicknames, but in any other context, they would be called gods. And like all gods, their origins are shrouded in a thick fog of contradictory folklore, lost civilizations, and scientific anomalies that suggest a much darker, much more complex history than the games often let on. Think about the sheer scale of the questions that remain unanswered. If Arceus truly created the universe from a single egg in a void of nothingness, what was the void? If Dialga and Palkia govern the flow of time and the expansion of space, what happens in the moments when they are captured by a 10-year-old child? We are told stories of a great war in Kalos that used the life force of thousands of Pokémon to fuel a weapon of mass destruction, yet we still don't fully understand the nature of the beings that powered it. The ruins of the burned tower in Johto, and hear the legend of the 3 nameless Pokémon who perished in the flames, only to be resurrected as the legendary beasts. But who were they before the fire? What did they lose in that transition from mortality to myth? There is a recurring theme of broken unity that haunts every corner of this world. The idea that the greatest powers we know are actually just fragments of something even larger, something that was shattered long ago. The Unova region speaks of a single, original dragon that represented a perfect harmony of truth and ideals, only to be torn apart by the conflicting hearts of twin princes. The result was Regiram and Zekrom, 2 halves of a whole that can never truly be reunited without the hollow shell of Kyurem. This isn't just a story about dragons, it's a metaphor for the entropy that defines the legendary experience. Power in this world is rarely whole. It is divided, sealed away, or cast into alternate dimensions like the Distortion world. This pattern repeats in Galar with the Darkest Day, where a cosmic entity from the stars nearly unmade reality, only to be stopped by heroes who were then forgotten by time. It in the Alola region, where the very light of the world was nearly consumed by a ravenous, blinded god from another dimension. The stakes of these mysteries are higher than just flavor text in a Pokédex. They represent a fundamental struggle between the natural world and the human ambition to control it. Throughout history, villainous teams and ancient kings have tried to harness the power of these legends, often with catastrophic results. From Cyrus trying to rewrite the laws of the universe to Team Rocket's cold, clinical attempt to clone the ancestor of all Pokémon, the message is clear. The legendaries are a mirror. They reflect the best and worst of humanity. When we look at Mewtwo, we aren't just looking at a powerful psychic type. We are looking at the ethical abyss of human ego. When we look at Ho-Oh, we are looking at the eternal hope for rebirth. These beings are the pillars upon which the entire Pokémon identity is built, Yet every time we think we have mapped out their history, a new discovery, like the paradox Pokémon of Area Zero or the crystalline mysteries of Terrapagos, forces us to question everything we thought we knew. Why do these beings allow themselves to be caught? Why do they appear only at the most pivotal moments in history? And most importantly, what is the ultimate fate of a world that relies on such volatile godlike entities for its very survival? Tonight, we are going on a journey that spans billions of years, from the silent birth of the cosmos to the high-tech laboratories of the modern era. We will peel back the layers of regional folklore to find the hard truths hidden beneath the myths. We will examine the architectural ruins, the ancient tapestries, and the hidden dialogue that connects a legendary bird in Kanto to a cosmic dragon in the furthest reaches of space. This is not just a list of powerful creatures, it is a chronological investigation into the soul of the Pokémon universe. We are looking for the thread that connects the creation of time to the modern energy crisis, and the silent watchers who have seen it all. The deeper we go, the more we realize that the world of Pokémon isn't just a place of adventure. It is a graveyard of ancient gods and a cradle for new, terrifying mysteries. So settle in, let the world around you fade away, and prepare to go deep into the history of everything. Before anything existed, there was nothing. Not darkness, not light, not silence. Because silence implies the absence of sound, and sound requires a medium to travel through. There was simply a void so absolute that it resists description, and within that void, there was an egg. This is the oldest story Pokémon has to tell. It predates every ancient ruin, every myth passed down through the generations of Sinto, every legend carved into the walls of the Spear Pillar. It is the story of the moment before time itself began. The cosmic egg is not a metaphor for potential or a symbol of creation. It is the literal starting point of all reality, a singularity of infinite possibility wrapped in a shell that had no outside, because the concept of outside hadn't been invented yet. We call it an egg because that's the closest image our minds can grasp. But an egg is a container for life, and this egg was life itself in its most concentrated form. Imagine, if you will allow the stretch, a point of pure consciousness without any universe to perceive, without any past or future to define itself against. That is what slumbered inside the egg, a single awareness. A being that had never known anything except the completeness of its own existence, because there was nothing else to know. Then something happened, the egg broke open, and Arceus awoke. Now, the metaphysical implications of this awakening are staggering. Arceus did not simply decide to create the universe. It had no frame of reference for what a universe even was. It existed in a state of total solitude, and then, for reasons no legend fully explains, it chose to end that solitude. It chose to shape the void into something it could interact with. That choice is what separates Arceus from almost every other mythological creator across human cultures. Many creation myths describe a god who deliberately designs the world. But here, the act of creation seems almost involuntary, a natural consequence of consciousness existing in a place where nothing else exists. Arceus didn't build the universe like a craftsman builds a house. It simply became aware of its own isolation, and that awareness rippled outward, collapsing the void into form. Modern science struggles with this. The theory of biological evolution, the Big Bang, the gradual accretion of matter from quantum fluctuations. These are all stories we tell ourselves to make sense of a universe that appears to have arisen without intention. Sinnoh myths clash with biology because they assert that intention came first, that a singular mind predates the laws of physics. But here is where it gets interesting. The clash is not as clean as you might think. The Pokémon world operates under its own rules. And those rules admit the possibility that a conscious entity could be the cause of the Big Bang, rather than a product of it. Arceus is the original one, a title that appears in the game's lore, and that title is a claim about priority. It says that before atoms, before space-time, before the electromagnetic force, there was a being, and that being is the reason any of those things exist. But what does it mean to be the original one, in a world where other legendary come and also govern fundamental forces? Well, the original one is not just the first in a sequence. It is the source from which all other fundamental aspects of reality are derived. When Arceus awoke, it did not create the universe in a single instantaneous flash. It exerted a shaping power, described in ancient texts as the Thousand Arms. This phrase is both literal and metaphorical. The Thousand Arms are the forces or extensions of Arceus's will, the instruments used to sculpt the fabric of existence. Some interpretations suggest that each arm is a separate thread of reality: time, space, matter, energy, life, death, entropy, order. Others see them as a poetic description of the sheer multitude of creative acts Arceus performed in those first moments. Imagine the scene. The void is no longer empty. Arceus stands at the center of a newly born cosmos, and from its form, countless tendrils of power reach out, each one gripping a part of the formless chaos and pulling it into shape. These are not literal arms like limbs of flesh and bone. They are conduits of pure will, like the branches of a tree that has no trunk yet, only a network of intentions, and with each arm, Arceus weaves the structure of reality. It separates light from dark, but that is too simple. It creates dimensions, defines directions, sets the speed of causality, and breathes existence into the first lesser beings who will inherit the task of maintaining what was built. This process is where the narrative of creation becomes even more profound, because Arceus does not remain as the sole active force forever. Instead, the Thousand Arms begin to condense into distinct entities, the first legendary Pokémon. The most immediate of these are the ones who will become known as the creators of time, space, and antimatter. But even they are not fully separate from Arceus. They are extensions, children of the original will, yet they possess their own consciousness, their own purpose. And that purpose is to ensure that the universe does not unravel. The cosmic egg, then, was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of a chain reaction that continues to this day. Every Pokémon, every region, every human who ever lived in the Pokémon world is a distant echo of that first awakening. The silence before time is not a period we can ever visit, because we are creatures of time, but we can sense its residue in the myths. We can feel the weight of that original solitude when we read the Pokédex entries that speak of Arceus as a being that sleeps in a different dimension beyond the reach of even Dialga and Palkia. And this raises a question that will lead us deeper into the mystery. If Arceus created the fundamental forces, then who or what ensured those forces could interact with each other? How did time and space find their balance? How did the universe become something more than a chaotic soup of raw potential? The answer lies in the next chapter, where we will meet the architects who took the blueprint Arceus left behind and built the very fabric of reality itself. When Arceus first stirred in the void, something had to give shape to that awakening. The act of existing requires a stage, a sequence, a somewhere. From the singular consciousness of the original one, two forces emerged not as separate beings at first, but as the fundamental grammar of reality itself. Dialga became the heartbeat of time, the pulse that measures every moment from the first flicker of light to the final sigh of a star. Without a sentinel to guard the flow of history, causality would collapse into a shapeless jumble where beginnings and endings have meaning. Dialga is not merely a Pokémon that controls time. Dialga is time, just as the river is the water and the water is the current. Every tick of the clock in every universe echoes from that first breath of temporal order, but time alone is an empty corridor without space to contain it. Palkia was born to stretch the fabric of dimension, to give form and distance to all that exists. The stabilization of space is a fragile balance, every atom holding its place, every galaxy spinning in its assigned orbit, every boundary between here and there, maintained by a will that predates matter. Palkia does not simply warp space for battle. Palkia is the reason you can stand apart from the stars, the reason there is an inside and an outside, the reason anything has location at all. Together, these two beings form the axis on which reality turns, their presence woven into the very structure of existence. Yet for all their cosmic authority, they are not distant gods indifferent to the world. The Spear Pillar incident is the clearest evidence that these forces can be summoned, challenged, even harnessed by mental hands. Atop Mount Coronet, where the Sinnoh region holds its highest peak, lies a temple older than any recorded civilization. There, humans have attempted to call forth Dialga and Palkia through ritual and technology, forcing the architects of reality to appear as tools for ambition. When the laws of physics are forcibly summoned, when time and space are dragged into the light of a cold mountain, the fabric shudders. That moment of summoning reveals how thin the membrane between our world and the raw forces of creation truly is. It is a reminder that these beings are not pets to be caught, but pillars to be respected. But even with time and space in place, something was missing. The universe requires not only structure but meaning, not only dimensions but souls. This is where the Lake Trio enters the myth: Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf, the beings of knowledge, emotion, and willpower. Their hidden purpose is far deeper than mere companions to Dialga and Palkia. They were created to balance raw power with spirit, to ensure that the cold mechanics of existence are animated by the fire of consciousness. Without the Lake Trio, time and space would be empty vessels, a ticking clock in a hollow room. With them, reality becomes something that can be felt, understood, and shaped by choice. They are the guardians of the inner world, the trinity that makes the outer world worth inhabiting. So the creation of the Pokémon universe is not just a story of cosmic forces. It is a story of necessity, the necessity of a steady heartbeat, of a stable stage, of a soul to feel it all. And as with any grand design, there is always a shadow, a piece that did not fit, a force that could not be contained within the new order. That thread leads us to a place where time does not flow, where space is a twisted knot, and where a third being was cast out for reasons that may never be fully known. The story of the Banished Third is not a sequel. It is the other side of the same coin, and it is waiting to be told. And so we leave the architects of time and space standing at the threshold of a finished universe. Dialga set the rhythm of history, Palkia stretched the fabric of the physical world, and for a moment everything was stable, ordered, and new. But creation is rarely a gentle process. When you bring a cosmos into existence, you do not simply declare light and step back. You tear open voids, you shatter silence, you carve a reality out of raw potential, and what you leave behind is not always peaceful. There is a third being, born in the same moment as Dialga and Palkia, but with a nature that did not fit. They call it Giratina, the renegade, the Banished Third. And to understand why it was cast out, we have to look at what it represented. In the lore of Cinnabar, the creation trio is often described as governing time, space, and antimatter. But antimatter is not merely a name for a substance that annihilates when it meets ordinary matter. It is a concept of opposition, of mirroring, of everything that exists in the negative, the inverse, the shadow. In a universe built on the stability of linear time and continuous space, antimatter is chaos. It is the dimension that defies the rules. When Arceus shaped the world, it is said that Giratina's very presence threatened to undo the fabric that Dialga and Palkia had just woven. Its antimatter reality clashed with the positive matter of the cosmos, creating fractures, tears, and distortions. For a young universe, still settling into its new laws, such instability was unacceptable. Arceus did not destroy Giratina, instead it did something more deliberate. It banished the being to a separate dimension. A place that mirrored our own but followed different physics, a realm of inverted gravity, floating islands, and swirling violet skies. They call it the distortion world. But exile was not punishment in the way we think of it. It was containment. The distortion world is not a prison built out of malice. It is a quarantine zone, a place where antimatter can exist without unraveling the universe. And Giratina, left alone in that inversion of reality, became something else. It became the guardian of that boundary, the warden of the thin wall that separates our world from the shadow world. That boundary, in the human realm of Sinnoh, is marked by a place called Turnback Cave. It is a labyrinth of stone corridors and dim light, hidden in the heart of the region's most haunted marshland. Travelers who enter speak of a shifting geometry, paths that rearrange themselves, chambers that feel larger inside than they look outside. The veil between the world of the living and the world of shadows is at its thinnest there, and deep within, in the final chamber, is a portal to the distortion world. Turnback Cave is more than a dungeon. It is a reminder that Giratina is not gone, it is waiting, and for generations, the people of Sinnoh have told stories about the creature that dwells in that mirrored dimension. Some call it a demon, a monster that was too violent for creation. But the truth is more complex. The violence of creation was not Giratina's doing. It was born from the same raw energy that created time and space. Its nature was simply incompatible with the stability that Arceus desired, so it was set apart, left to drift in a dimension where antimatter could fold in on itself without causing harm. And in that isolation, Giratina did not become a destroyer. It became something else, something darker but also something necessary, because the distortion world is not just a prison, it is a pillar. It holds the boundary between existence and non-existence. Without it, the positive universe would leak into the antimatter void, and reality would collapse. Giratina, by being banished, became the protector of that boundary. It is the reason our world remains intact, The Renegade's redemption is not a story of a monster discovering kindness. It is a story of purpose. Over time, Giratina's role shifted from a threat to a guardian. It does not seek to destroy the world that cast it out. It guards the seam where our world meets the void, and it waits for those who dare to cross the boundary. When trainers finally found their way to the distortion world, they encountered a being that was not hostile, but watchful. Giratina did not attack without reason. It observed, it tested, and occasionally it accepted. The Pokémon that emerges from that inverted space is not the same creature that was banished at the dawn of time. It has adapted, grown, and claimed its exile as its domain. And yet, the mystery remains. Why would Arceus create a being so dangerous that it had to be separated from the rest of creation? Was it a mistake, or was it intentional? Perhaps the universe in its first moments needed a counterbalance. Light needs darkness, order needs chaos, and time needs a place where time does not flow. Giratina is that balance. It is the third piece that completes the trio, not by existing beside Dialga and Palkia, but by existing opposite them. So as we leave the distortion world, the thin veil between life and shadow still shimmers, held open by a creature that was once feared. But the universe does not stand still. Other forces were still cooling, still settling into their long sleep. And one of those forces would shape an entire planet's surface, locking continents into place and creating the very ground beneath our feet. That story begins with the cooling of the earth, when the land and sea first learned to quarrel, and when a third being rose to end their war by force. But that is a chapter for another night. The distortion world was sealed, a dark mirror locked away from the new universe. But creation was not yet finished. The cosmos had time and space, but it was still cooling, still settling into form. And as the young planet began to harden, two forces stirred from the primordial chaos, forces that would shape the world you now walk upon. They were not born from the egg in the void, nor from the architects of reality. They were older than the mountains, older than the seas, drawn from the molten heart of the planet itself. Groudon rose first. Or perhaps it is better to say that Groudon was the rising. The lithosphere, the solid crust of the earth, did not simply appear. It had to be forged, pushed upward through endless eruptions and tectonic convulsions. Groudon was that fury made flesh, a being of magma and basalt, whose very presence caused the continents to expand. Imagine a world without land, a globe of roiling ocean and volcanic vents. That was the early world. And then Groudon began its work. Each step it took left a new island in its wake. Each roar sent new mountain ranges clawing toward the sky. The continents we know today, with their vast plains and towering peaks, are the fossilized remains of Groudon's ancient rage. It was not a gentle creation, it was brutal, violent, and unceasing. The land was born from fire and pressure, and Groudon was the architect of that inferno. But the land could not expand forever without consequence. As Groudon pushed more rock upward, it displaced something else, the great waters. Kyogre slumbered in the deep, waiting, and when the land grew too bold, when the continents began to choke the sea, Kyogre awakened. The primordial deluge began. Rain that had no end, a sky that wept for centuries. Kyogre did not simply fill the oceans, it carved them. The endless rains poured down, eroding the newborn continents, tearing canyons into the stone, filling every depression with salt water. The sea expanded, swallowing land, sinking mountains beneath miles of ocean. Kyogre was not a gentle rain, either. It was a storm that had no mercy, a force that could drown the world if left unchecked. And so the eternal struggle began. Groudon and Kyogre were not enemies in the way that humans understand conflict. They were opposing natural forces, each designed to expand its domain without limit. The land wants to grow, to rise, to solidify. The sea wants to cover, to erode, to dissolve. They are locked in a cycle of mutual destruction, a dance of elements that has no end. When Groudon is too strong, it creates too much land, choking the atmosphere with volcanic ash. When Kyogre is too strong, it drowns all but the highest peaks, leaving no place for life to take root. Their battle is the heartbeat of the planet itself, a pulse of creation and destruction that has continued for eons in the deep time before history. But there is something that tethers these primal gods to the world. Something ancient that acts as an anchor, the blue and red orbs. These are not ordinary stones. They are relics from that forgotten era, fragments of the same primordial energy that gave form to Groudon and Kyogre. The red orb resonates with the continent maker, the blue orb with the ocean bringer, They are the only way that humans can even hope to communicate with these forces, to call them from their slumber, or to calm their fury. In the hands of those who understand their power, the orbs can be used to restore balance. But in the wrong hands, they are the keys to apocalypse. Because when Groudon and Kyogre are summoned, they do not simply appear. They resume their ancient war, and the land and sea rearrange themselves once more. The world you know, the continents you live on, the oceans you sail, are only temporary. They are the result of a million truces between fire and water. Each time Groudon and Kyogre clash, the map of the world is rewritten. Islands are born, coastlines vanish. The only constant is the struggle itself. And yet, something keeps this war from consuming everything. Something floats high above the battlefield, watching, waiting. Something that is neither land nor sea, but the thin line between them, the mediator in the ozone. We ended Chapter 4 beneath the weight of an endless war. Groudon had pulled continents from the churning magma, and Kyogre had drowned the sky in salt and storm. Their conflict was not a battle of two rivals. It was the planet tearing itself apart, land and sea refusing to share the same world. The rain fell for centuries, and the volcanoes never stopped. There was no morning, no evening, only the grey hiss of steam meeting water. But above that chaos, something else was watching, something that had always been there, riding the highest currents, where the air thins to nothing, and the curve of the earth becomes visible. The sky serpent, Rayquaza. Rayquaza's descent was not an attack. It was not a declaration of war. It was the slow, inevitable motion of a being that had been put in place before either Groudon or Kyogre had drawn their first breath. From the ozone layer, where ultraviolet light bathes everything in silent fire, Rayquaza saw the world breaking its own balance, and it came down. The first thing you notice about Rayquaza is how unlike its subordinates it is. Groudon is heavy, solid, a walking earthquake. Kyogre is vast, deep, a current-given consciousness. But Rayquaza is fluid, a ribbon of emerald and gold that moves through the atmosphere like a thought through a mind. It has no need for land or sea because it has never left the sky. And that sky is its domain, its responsibility, its prison and its throne. When Rayquaza enters the lower atmosphere, the weather itself begins to change. The hurricanes that Kyogre summoned lose their fury. The volcanic ash that Groudon threw into the air settles. This is not a coincidence. This is the Delstri, an ability unique to Rayquaza, a field of atmospheric pressure that literally negates the catastrophic weather of its subordinates. The rain clouds tear apart, the heat waves dissipate, the sky clears as if a hand has wiped the glass clean. Think about what that means. The most powerful forces of nature, the expansion of the lithosphere, the deluge of the oceans, can be undone by the presence of a single creature. Rayquaza does not need to fight. It only needs to be there. Its very existence quiets the storm. It is the mediator, the stabilizer, the one who reminds the earth and sea that they are not the only powers in the world. And yet Rayquaza does not stay. Once the balance is restored, it returns to its home in the ozone layer, far above where humans can see. It does not rule. It does not demand worship. It simply watches, waiting for the next time the world forgets its place. But the people of Hoenn did not forget. The Draconid people, an ancient civilization that lived in the shadow of the sky, understood what Rayquaza had done for them. They built a monument to honor their savior, a structure unlike any other in the Pokémon world. The Sky Pillar. The Sky Pillar's architecture is a testament to devotion and desperation. It rises from a small island, a spiral of stone, and ancient engineering that reaches toward the clouds. Every step was placed with intention. Every level designed to bring the climber closer to the one who lives above. The Draconid people did not build it for themselves. They built it as an invitation, a prayer carved into the earth. They wanted Rayquaza to know that someone below was paying attention. The tower is not a fortress. It has no walls to keep enemies out. It is open to the wind, exposed to the sky, a stairway that leads nowhere except upward. At the very top, there is a chamber, a a simple platform where the air is thin and the horizon stretches forever. This is where the connection between human and legend becomes tangible, and it was here, in the silence of that high place, that something unprecedented happened. Mega evolution. Most people believe that mega evolution is a phenomenon of the Kalos region, discovered through a combination of ancient stones and modern science. But the truth is older. The truth is that Rayquaza was the first Pokémon to transcend its limits, and it did so not through a stone or a machine, but through human prayer. The Draconid people had no technology. They had no advanced understanding of genetics or energy. They had faith. They looked up at the sky, at the serpent that had saved them, and they poured everything they had into a single thought. Please stay. Please be with us. Please become more. And Rayquaza heard them, or perhaps it felt them. The energy of that collective wish, that desperate hope, reached the ozone layer and wrapped around Rayquaza like a second skin. It did not change what Rayquaza was. It unlocked what Rayquaza had always been. The emerald scales shifted, the yellow bands intensified, and a new form emerged. A mega evolution born not of science, but of love. This is the origin of the phenomenon. Every other mega evolution that came after, every stone and every bond between trainer and Pokémon, is a shadow of that first transformation. Rayquaza showed the world what was possible when a being and a people became one in purpose. And then it returned to the sky. The sky pillar still stands. The winds still howl around its peak. But Rayquaza does not live there. It comes when called, descends when the balance tips, and then withdraws again to the place where the air is too thin for anything else to follow. It is the loneliest of the weather trio, not because it has no companions, but because it chooses to exist where no one else can. Which brings us to another mystery. Another set of beings that predate even Rayquaza, carved from the same ancient stone and buried beneath the earth of Hoenn. They were never meant to be awake. They were never meant to be found. But someone, somewhere, pressed the wrong button, and the ground began to shake in a rhythm that did not belong to any heartbeat. That is the story of the Regi Architect. Rayquaza's work was one of restraint, keeping the world from tearing itself apart in an endless battle between sea and sky. But the story of Hoenn does not end with the aerial Mediator. There is a quieter, older force that shaped the land itself. A force that did not fight but pulled, did not command but built. Before the continents settled into their familiar contours, before maps could be drawn and borders imagined, there was a titan named Regi Architect. Regi Architect is the architect of continents, the living engine that dragged the land masses into place. Ancient texts speak of ropes, massive, impossibly long cords that this titan wrapped around the very bedrock of the world. Imagine a being so immense that it could tie cables around entire islands and pull them across the primordial sea, grinding stone against stone, shifting the crust of the planet as if it were a rug being straightened. This was not a gentle process. The grinding must have echoed through the depths, and the land groaned as it was towed to its final resting position. Where Regi Architect walked, the earth reshaped itself. Mountains rose in protest, valleys split open, and the coastlines we know today are the scarred remains of that Herculean labour. But why would such a titan need to move continents? The answer lies in balance. After Groudon raised the land and Kyogre filled the seas, the world was still raw, still chaotic. Islands were scattered, continents were huddled together, and the climate was unstable. Regi Architect understood that order required separation. Land masses spaced apart so that weather patterns could form, so that life could diversify, so that the planet could breathe. So it pulled Hoenn away from what would become Sinnoh, tore the land that would become Unova from the ancient supercontinent. Each rope burn was a deliberate act of creation, but even a titan cannot work forever. Regi Architect eventually grew weary, or perhaps its task was complete. Before it settled into a deep slumber, it did something remarkable. It created servants, not from flesh and blood, but from the very elements that had shaped the world. It took raw rock and infused it with will, molding a golem that could guard and build. It took ice from the highest peaks and crystallized a being of frozen purpose. It took steel from the Earth's core and forged a mechanical guardian. And there is a fourth, a golem of pure energy, one that seems to defy the material world entirely. These are the Regi, Regirock, Regish, Registeel, and the mysterious Regieleki, crafted not as equals but as tools, as assistants that could carry on its work or protect its resting place. Why would Regigigas need protection? Because humanity, for all its reverence, was terrified. The ancients knew what this titan could do. They had seen continents move, felt the earth quake under its tread. If Regigigas were to awaken angry, or if someone were to misuse its power, the world could be torn apart again. So they sealed the golems away, hiding them in chambers so deep that light never reached them, and to ensure no one would stumble upon them by accident, they locked those chambers with puzzles, complex patterns of braille that required knowledge, patience, and a certain humility to solve. Braille, the language of the blind, was a fitting cipher for secrets meant to be felt rather than seen. The ancients did not want the Regis to be found by the careless. They wanted only the truly devoted to have any chance of reaching them. One such chamber lies beneath the Snowpoint Temple, a frozen structure in the northernmost reaches of Sinnoh. There Regigigas sleeps. Its body is immense, a colossus of patterned stone and metal, dormant but not dead. The temple was built to contain it, to keep it isolated from the world above. But the seal is not eternal. The Titan will only awaken when the three original golems, Regirock, Regis and Registeel, are brought before it. That is the condition. A reunion of its servants, a signal that the time of waking has come. For centuries the temple stood silent, the Regis scattered across the world, lost to memory, but stories have a way of resurfacing. The fear that drove the ancients to hide these beings is not unlike the fear that surrounded another legendary tragedy, one that unfolded not in a temple, but in a great burning tower. That story, known as the tragedy of the Brass Tower, would change the relationship between humans and legendary Pokémon forever. And it begins with a fire that consumed not just wood and stone, but hope itself. If you walk through Ekrik City today, you might notice two towers standing side by side, their silhouettes cutting into the sky like a pair of ancient monuments to something the world has almost forgotten. One of them, the Tin Tower, gleams with the patina of age, carved from some silvery metal that has never quite tarnished. The other, the Brass Tower, is not what it once was. It is a ruin now, blackened and hollow, its upper floors collapsed into a crooked frame that leans against the wind. But it was not always a ruin, and the story of how it became one is a story about lightning, fire, rain, and a resurrection so profound that it changed the very meaning of life and death for three ordinary souls. You have heard about Regigigas, the continent shifter, the one who dragged land masses across the primordial sea with ropes of pure strength. That was an age of raw geology, when the world was still being hammered into shape by forces that did not care for gentleness. But after the continents were set, after the oceans had settled, after the sky had been tamed by Rayquaza, something else began to emerge. Not the shaping of rock, but the shaping of myth. And at the heart of that myth is a single night in Yoto, a night that unfolded minute by minute, hour by hour, as a tower burned. Let us take you back to that night. It is late, and the Brass Tower stands tall, its brass fittings catching the last light of dusk. The tower is a place of worship, a place where Pokémon and humans once gathered to honor the guardian of the skies. Inside, three Pokémon have taken shelter from the evening chill. They are not legendary, they are not powerful, they are simple creatures, perhaps lost, perhaps seeking warmth. The historians have never been able to name them. Their species are unknown, their names erased by time. But we know they were there, and we know they did not survive what happened next. The first sign is a crack in the sky, not thunder, not a rumble, but a sudden blinding flash of lightning. It strikes the top of the Brass Tower with a precision that feels almost intentional. The brass conducts the charge, and the energy surges downward, igniting something dry and old. The fire starts small, a flicker in the uppermost chamber, but within minutes, it is a roaring inferno. The wooden beams catch, the tapestries turn to ash, and the heat becomes so intense that the brass itself begins to glow. The 3 Pokémon inside are trapped. They cannot escape. Their cries are lost in the roar of the flames. Now the wind picks up. It fans the fire, pushing it lower, deeper into the tower. The people of Ecruteak gather, but there is nothing they can do. The structure is too unstable, the flames too fierce, and then the rain begins. Not a gentle drizzle, but a sudden, violent downpour, as if the sky itself is trying to wash away its own mistake. The lightning, the fire, and the rain. All 3 converge in a single moment of chaos. The rain falls hard, but it is too late. The tower is already gutted. The 3 Pokémon have perished. And yet, that is not where the story ends. Because from the ashes of that tragedy, something miraculous occurred. Ho-Oh, the rainbow-winged guardian, descended from the heavens. It was drawn to the smoke, to the sorrow, to the lingering presence of lives cut short. Ho-Oh looked upon the 3 fallen Pokémon, and in an act of compassion that defies explanation, it resurrected them, not as they were, but transformed. The fire that had killed them became the burning mane of Entei. The lightning that had struck the tower became the crackling speed of Raikou, and the rain that had fallen too late became the purifying waters of Suicune. 3 nameless casualties, reborn as the legendary beasts. That resurrection is the birth of a new myth. Ho-Oh did not just bring them back to life. It elevated them, gave them power over the very elements that had destroyed their first lives. And then Ho-Oh left something behind. A single radiant feather known as the Rainbow Wing. It is said that this feather only appears to those with a pure heart, a heart untouched by selfishness or greed. It is a symbol of hope, a promise that even in the darkest tragedy, there is the possibility of renewal. The Rainbow Wing has been sought by many, but found by few. Some believe it still rests somewhere in Yoto, hidden in a place where only a truly pure soul can find it. Others think it vanished long ago, its purpose fulfilled, but the legend persists. And the memory of that night, the lightning, the fire, the rain, the 3 unknown Pokémon, the miracle of Ho-Oh, remains etched into the identity of Ecruteak City. The towers still stand, one gleaming, one blackened. They are reminders of what was lost and what was gained. But if you listen closely, you might hear whispers of another presence. Something that dwells in the shadows of the Whirl Islands. A guardian whose story is intertwined with the very same skies that Ho-Oh once crossed. That is a tale for another night. A tale of Ashido that has never quite dispersed. After the firestorm had finally exhausted itself, after the last ember of the brass tower had been swallowed by the rain, Yoto was left with 3 impossible graves. The charred remains of the tower had collapsed into a hollow monument, and somewhere beneath those ruins lay the 3 unnamed Pokémon that had been caught in the lightning strike. Ho-Oh had resurrected them, yes, and those 3 had become the legendary beasts. Raikou, Entei, Suicune, but the tragedy itself had shaken something far older and far deeper. The guardian of the seas, the one who had raised the Whirl Islands from the ocean floor, had been watching from the depths, and what he saw changed his relationship with the surface world forever. The Pokémon that chooses exile is extraordinary. Most legendaries stake their territory into the fabric of the world. They build shrines, they demand reverence, they walk among mortals as forces of nature, but Lugia chose the opposite. After the brass tower burned, after he witnessed the casual violence that a storm could inflict upon innocent creatures, he withdrew. He swam down into the deepest trench of the ocean, into a cavern system that would become known as the Whirl Islands, and he sealed himself inside. This was not a punishment, it was a decision. Lugia understood something that few other legendaries ever grasped. His very existence was a danger to the world. To understand why, you have to appreciate what it means to be the master of the 3 legendary birds. Articuno, Zapdos and Moltres are not subordinate to Lugia in the way that a general commands soldiers. They are more like fragments of a larger consciousness. Each bird governs an elemental extreme: the absolute cold of the highest mountains, the raw electricity of the storm front, the relentless heat of volcanic eruptions. But all three are, in a sense, extensions of Lugia's power. When the three birds fight, the world experiences climate upheaval. When they are calm, the seasons hold their boundaries. But Lugia is the axis around which they turn. The moment Lugia exerts his will, the birds feel it. And the moment Lugia loses control, they become catastrophes. There is a reason that the ancient cultures of Johto and the Sevii Islands built their rituals around the Silver Wing and the Tidal Bell. The Silver Wing, a feather shed only by Lugia himself, is not a mere souvenir. It resonates with the Guardian's signature frequency, a frequency that can cut through miles of ocean water. The Tidal Bell, on the other hand, is the listener. When rung in the presence of the Silver Wing, its chime creates a harmonic that can reach Lugia in the deepest recesses of his lair. These artifacts are not weapons, they are communication devices, designed specifically for one purpose: to ask permission. Because you do not summon Lugia, you petition him. And if the answer is no, the Tidal Bell remains silent, and the sea remains still. But why such elaborate tools? Why not simply call out to him? Because Lugia has learned that his voice is destruction. When he speaks, the air around him trembles. When he flaps his wings, the weather pattern of an entire hemisphere can rewrite itself. The Pokédex entry from the Johto region records a chilling statistic. A single flap of Lugia's wings can cause storms that last 40 days. Think about what that means. 40 days of continuous tempest. 40 days of gale-force winds. Of waves that could fling ships onto cliffs. Of lightning and hail and flooding. That is the power Lugia holds. And it is the reason he chose to hide. He knows that if he rises in anger, or even in fear, the coastlines of Johto, Kanto and beyond would be battered into unrecognizable shapes. So he sits in the whirling current of the deepest ocean, pressing his wings tight against his sides, and he breathes slowly. The connection between Lugia and the legendary birds is not just one of mastery, it is one of responsibility. Articuno, Zapdos and Moltres are like the children of a storm that Lugia can never quite calm. When they are agitated, he feels it. When they are restless, the sea around him churns. And when they fight, as they have countless times over the centuries, Lugia must intervene. But he does not intervene directly. He sends ripples through the ocean, low-frequency pulses that soothe the birds' instincts, reminding them that they are part of a larger whole. It is a delicate dance, one that has kept the world from slipping into an endless winter or a perpetual inferno. But the irony is inescapable. The being that prevents the apocalypse is the same being that could cause it with a single flap. There is a theory among the more learned folklore scholars of the Pokémon world that Lugia's self-imposed exile is also a form of mourning. The Brass Tower tragedy was not just a fire, it was a failure. Lugia, as the guardian of the seas, had responsibility over all weather that touched the ocean. The lightning that struck the tower came from a storm that had gathered over the Whirl Islands. Lugia could have calmed that storm. He could have scattered the clouds before they reached Ekrotique City, but he did not. Perhaps he was distracted. Perhaps he chose not to interfere. The truth is lost to history, but what remains is Lugia's guilt. And guilt for a being of such magnitude is a prison as deep as any ocean trench. Now the Whirl Islands stand as a living monument to Lugia's solitude. The currents that spin around them are not natural. They are a barrier created by Lugia himself to keep out the curious and the foolish. Only those who possess the Silver Wing and the Tidal Bell can navigate those waters safely. And even then, when you reach the heart of the islands, when you descend into the cavern where the light vanishes, you will not find a roaring beast. You will find a stillness. A patient, ancient stillness, waiting for the moment when it becomes safe to breathe again. That moment may never come. The world is not kind to beings of pure power, and there are other mysteries, deeper and stranger, that lie beyond even the shadow of the Whirl Islands. Somewhere in the desert, on a different continent, there is a shimmer that appears at midday. A mirage that is not a mirage. It is a door, and behind that door, something waits. Something that has never been fully explained. But that is a story for another night. For now, rest in the knowledge that beneath the waves, a guardian holds his breath, and the birds wait for his command, and the sea remains still. From the shadow of Lugia's deep-sea sanctuary, we now turn to a being that hides not in ocean trenches or storm-locked whirlpools, but in the very blueprint of life itself. While Lugia chose exile to escape a world that feared its power, this Pokémon seems to have slipped through the cracks of history, appearing only as a ghost story, a rumour among researchers, a glimmer in the jungle canopy. It is the Mirage Pokémon Mew, and its mystery is older than any tower fire or tectonic shift. The theory that Mew is the universal ancestor of all Pokémon is not merely a romantic idea. It is rooted in the most profound biological evidence the Pokémon world has ever produced. Every cell of Mew's body contains the complete genetic code of every Pokémon species that has ever existed. This is not hyperbole. Laboratory analysis of Mew's DNA reveals sequences that match the cellular signatures of creatures as diverse as Magikarp, Arceus, and everything in between. It is as if Mew carries within itself a living library of all evolutionary possibilities, a genetic encyclopedia written in the language of life itself. But how did we come to know this? The story of Mew's discovery begins not in a quiet research lab, but deep in the heart of the Guyana jungle. In the late 20th century, a scientific expedition ventured into that dense, untamed wilderness, hoping to catalogue rare flora and fauna. What they found instead was a trail of footprints, small, feline-like impressions leading to a clearing where a strange pink creature was observed for only a handful of seconds. That creature was Mew. The expedition managed to collect hair and skin samples before the being vanished into the undergrowth. And those samples became the foundation for the most controversial genetic research in Pokémon history. The findings were so extraordinary that they attracted the attention of a certain corporate entity on Cinnabar Island. But we will return to that later. The transformative potential of Mew is not limited to its DNA. It can learn any move, adapt to any environment, and most famously, use Transform to become an exact copy of any opponent. But this ability is not mere mimicry. When Mew transforms, it is not changing its shape as a trick. It is accessing a dormant genetic program encoded in its own body, activating a sequence that allows it to express the form and power of any Pokémon it chooses. In a way, Mew does not copy, it remembers. Every species that has ever lived is already within it, waiting to be called forth. Yet for all its power, Mew has chosen to remain hidden. The Faroe Island, a remote, almost unreachable location in the Southern Seas, is one of the few places it has been consistently sighted. This island is not marked on most maps. It exists outside the usual shipping lanes, surrounded by treacherous currents and strange weather patterns that seem to discourage visitors. Why would a being of such immense genetic potential retreat to such a sanctuary? Some believe it is not hiding from humanity out of fear, but out of wisdom. Mew may have witnessed what happens when its power falls into the wrong hands. When cloning technology twists its genetic legacy into something born of ambition rather than nature, and that brings us to a place where the line between legend and science blurs into catastrophe. A laboratory on Cinnabar Island, where researchers took those jungle samples and decided to play creator. The result was not a mirage, but a monster. A being forged from Mew's stolen genetic code, but stripped of its innocence, its playfulness, its desire to remain unseen. This creature would not hide. It would demand to be known, and its story is about to unfold in a chapter we call The Monster of Cinnabar Island. The search for Mew in the Guyana jungle may have ended in mystery, but the traces it left behind would soon ignite a firestorm of human ambition, because one organization decided that if nature could produce a being of such limitless potential, then science could do better. And so begins the story of the creature they called Mewtwo, the monster of Cinnabar Island, Project Mewtwo. Even the name carries a cold, clinical weight. It was not a myth born from ancient storms or forgotten wars. It was a deliberate act of creation, a sin committed in the name of progress. Team Rocket, the criminal syndicate that had long sought to commodify Pokémon power, set their sights on the rarest genetic material in existence. They obtained a sample of Mew's DNA, smuggled from the depths of the Guyana jungle, and they brought it to a hidden laboratory beneath the volcanic soil of Cinnabar Island. There, they would attempt to forge the world's strongest Pokémon. The ethics of this project are almost too obvious to state, but they deserve a moment of quiet consideration. This was not a partnership with a wild creature. This was not a legend unfolding through natural selection. This was the will to dominate, coded into double helixes, incubated in steel chambers. The scientists working on Project Mewtwo believed they were unlocking the secrets of life itself. But they were also crossing a line that should never have been drawn. They were playing God with a living being who never asks to exist, and they failed many times. The Fuji Journals, a set of recovered documents that detail the early experiments, offer a chilling look at what happened inside that lab. The logs speak of genetic instability, cellular collapse, and the quiet thrum of psychic energy that began to build long before the body was ready. The first attempts produced only short-lived, agonized forms. The journals record a litany of failed subjects, each one a creature that could barely hold its own shape before the psychic pressure tore it apart. But the scientists pressed on, driven by a combination of corporate greed and scientific hubris. They refined the process, manipulated the DNA, and finally they succeeded. They created a being of extraordinary psychic power. A living weapon that could bend spoons and shatter minds with a thought. But they also created something they could not control. The birth of this psychic powerhouse was not a triumph. It was a catastrophe. The creature, designated Mewtwo, awoke with a fury that shattered the laboratory walls and killed many of the staff. It was intelligent, fiercely intelligent, and it understood immediately what it was: a copy, a product, a thing made to serve a purpose it had never consented to. And so it fled. It escaped Cinnabar Island and went looking for answers. It found the remnants of its own creation story, and it found a profound loneliness that no amount of psychic power could fill. Eventually, Mewtwo retreated to a place of absolute solitude, the Cerulean Cave. Hidden beneath the waters of Cerulean City, accessible only by diving and navigating a labyrinth of dark tunnels, the cave became its sanctuary. Why would the world's most powerful clone choose to isolate itself in such a desolate place? Because solitude was the only freedom it had ever known. In that cave, there were no scientists, no trainers, no expectations. There was only the cold, damp stone and the silence of its own thoughts. Mewtwo waited there, not hiding from fear, but from the weight of being the most dangerous thing in existence. It had no desire to conquer, no desire to destroy. It wanted only to be left alone, but the world would not leave it alone. Trainers came, drawn by rumors of a legendary Pokémon lurking in the cave. Some sought to capture it for glory, others for profit. Mewtwo repelled them all with a casual sweep of its psychic might. It was a force of nature, a god in a cage of its own making. And then something strange happened. Years later, when a trainer proved worthy, Mewtwo allowed itself to be caught, not as a surrender, but as a choice. It accepted a bond, though it never fully trusted. And here is where the mystery deepens into something truly remarkable. The Mega Mewtwo paradox. Mewtwo, a creature born entirely from human intervention, a clone, a manufactured being, somehow achieved a form of evolution that went beyond nature. Mega evolution, in the Pokémon world, is a phenomenon rooted in a deep bond between trainer and Pokémon, and it often taps into ancient primal energy. But Mewtwo has two mega forms, Mega Mewtwo X and Mega Mewtwo Y, both of which represent a level of power that should be impossible for an artificial life form. How can a being created in a lab access something so fundamentally connected to the natural world's evolutionary heritage? The leading theory is that Mewtwo's DNA, derived from Mew, carries the genetic blueprint for all Pokémon life. Mew, as the universal ancestor, holds within its cells the potential for every form and every power that has ever existed. By cloning Mew, Team Rocket inadvertently created a creature that could tap into that ancestral memory. The Mega Evolution is not a gift from some ancient force. It is a reawakening of a deep, dormant potential that was always there, buried in the very fabric of its being. Mewtwo did not evolve through natural selection. It evolved by remembering what it was never meant to know. This paradox challenges everything we think we understand about legendary Pokémon. Are they defined by their origin or by their power? Mewtwo was born in a vat, but it commands the same awe and fear as the lords of time and space. It retreated to a cave, but it emerged with a will stronger than any that had ever tried to control it. It is a monster, yes, but a monster with a soul that questions its own existence. And in that questioning, it becomes something more than a weapon. It becomes a mirror, reflecting the ambition and the regret of the humans who made it. Now the story of Mewtwo is only one chapter in a long history of humans trying to harness legendary power. But there is another story, far older, about a dragon that once held the power of an entire kingdom in its single form. That dragon would be split in two by a war of ideals, and its fragments would become the foundation of a region's identity. That story begins in Unova, where the original dragon waits for someone to understand what was lost when unity was broken. Before we dive deeper into this incredible journey, I'm curious. Where in the world are you watching this from? Drop a comment below and let our global community know. And if you're finding this as mind-blowing as I am, hit that like button to help more people discover this story. The scientist who created Mewtwo, Dr. Fuji, was trying to build the strongest life form on Earth. But in the Unova region, an older story tells of a being that didn't need to be manufactured because it was already whole. And its power wasn't just physical, it was philosophical. The original dragon of Unova was the foundation of an entire kingdom, a creature so vast in purpose that it embodied both truth and ideals at the same time. That unity didn't last. The kingdom was born from the twin heroes, two brothers, or perhaps two friends, who shared a vision of a perfect society. They weren't conquerors or tyrants, they were builders, who wanted to create a place where people could live in harmony. The original dragon served them as a single entity, a dragon that represented the balance between what is real and what is possible. The kingdom prospered under that guidance, but the peace was fragile because the heroes themselves began to disagree. One brother believed the kingdom should be built on absolute truth, on history, on facts, on the unchangeable reality of the world. The other believed the future mattered more, that ideals and dreams could shape a better tomorrow, even if they contradicted the past. They argued for days, then weeks, then years. The dragon felt the rift growing inside it, and then came the great split. It wasn't a battle between two dragons fighting each other. It was a tearing apart from within. The original dragon's body literally divided into two separate beings. One became Reshiram, a creature of pure white flame whose fire burned not with destruction, but with the pursuit of objective reality and history. The other became Zekrom, a being of black lightning, whose storms crackled with the drive toward a future shaped by conviction and dreams. And when the split completed, the two halves stood opposed. The twin heroes chose sides. One took control of Reshiram, the other of Zekrom, and they fought a war that shattered the kingdom they had built together. The land of Unova was scarred by the conflict. The cities burned, the fields turned to ash, and the people who had once lived in harmony were forced to take sides in a war that neither side could win. Reshiram's fire is not random. It is a flame that seeks out truth. When Reshiram burns, it does so to reveal what is hidden, to expose lies, to enforce the facts of history. The Pokémon's flames are said to be hot enough to melt all falsehood, but truth, when wielded without compassion, can be just as cruel as any lie. Zekrom's lightning, on the other hand, is a force of creation. It sparks ideas, it ignites ambition, It powers the will to change the world. Lightning is sudden and unpredictable, but it also carries the energy to transform. Zekrom's storms are the storms of revolution. Both dragons are terrifying, but neither is evil. They are simply the extremes of a single idea that could no longer be held together. After the war, the twin heroes vanished. Some say they died in the final battle. Others say they walked away in shame. What remains are the two dragons, sleeping in opposite corners of Unova, waiting for someone who believes in either truth or ideals to call them forth. And then there is Curum, the hollow husk of what the original dragon left behind. But that part of the story comes later. For now, understand that Unova's legend is not about monsters. It's about the danger of forgetting that truth and ideals are not enemies. They are two halves of the same whole. And when they are divided, the fire and the lightning will always tear the world apart. The next time you hear about a frozen shell in the depths of a cavern, you'll know why it waits in silence. That emptiness is the echo of a dragon that chose to break rather than bend. After the twin heroes drove the original dragon apart, the kingdom of Unova settled into two separate ideologies. One half of the dragon, the Wing of Truth, flew into the mountains as Reshiram. The other, the Wing of Ideals, took form as Zekrom and disappeared into the lightning storms above the desert. And what remained of the original being? What was left behind when that great primordial creature shattered under the weight of human argument? The answer lies at the northern edge of the region, where a circular chasm opens in the ice, a place the locals call the Giant Chasm. And at the bottom of that frozen wound sits a creature that is neither Reshiram nor Zekrom, but something older and more incomplete, a hollow husk, a shell of power waiting to be filled. Curum is the frozen remnant of the original dragon. Its body is a shell of ice, as if the heat of truth and the fire of ideals both fled, leaving only the cold emptiness that remained. The Pokédex entries describe it as a Pokémon that lost its body after being separated. Its ice shell is not natural armor, it is a containment vessel, a prison. The creature is the original form that was carved into, emptied out, and left to freeze in the darkness of the chasm. And here is the part that makes Curum so deeply unsettling. It knows what it lost. It remembers being whole, and it wants that back. The abominable Pokémon, as some call it, does not simply exist in the Giant Chasm. It waits. It absorbs. When a trainer encounters Curum in the wild, the creature does not attack mindlessly. It studies. It senses the presence of truth and ideals in the world, and if given the chance, it will try to take them back. That is why the legend speaks of Curum searching for its halves over the centuries, not out of malice, but out of a desperate need to become complete. But how could it possibly reunite with Reshiram and Zekrom, when those two beings are separate, independent, and each holding a piece of the original soul? That is where the science of the ancient world crosses into the territory of the terrifying. The artifact known as the DNA splicers was not crafted by modern hands. It was discovered buried deep in the ruins of the kingdom, a device that allows for the fusion of legendary entities, a technology that predates the split itself. The splicers emit a frequency that resonates with the genetic threads of the original dragon. When one half of the splicer is used on Curum and the other on Reshiram or Zekrom, the two are forcibly drawn together. Their bodies melt and reform into a single being. The result is a new form, a fusion that claims to be the return of the original dragon. But is it really? When Curum absorbs Reshiram, its frozen shell crackles with white fire. The ice reshapes into wings and a tail of flame. The creature becomes Curum White, a being of both truth and absolute zero. When it absorbs Zekrom, the ice turns black, charged with lightning. The form becomes Curum Black, a fusion of ideals and frozen rage. In these fused states, Curum has access to a signature move unlike any other, Fusion Flare or Fusion Bolt, moves that can combine into a single devastating blast called the Furious Frost. The power is immense. The being is closer to the original than either half alone, but the question lingers, is this a true reunion or a forced imitation? The Pokédex entries for Kyurem White and Kyurem Black hint at the danger. One entry says the fused creature freezes the air around it, turning the atmosphere to ice. Another claims its power can go out of control, threatening to freeze the entire world. That is the problem with forcing two halves back together when they were never meant to be split in the first place. The original dragon was a being of perfect balance between truth and ideals. But by using the DNA splicers to reunite Kyurem with only one half, the result is unbalanced. The fusion becomes a monster of absolute cold, neither absolute truth or absolute ideals. It is not the original. It is a patchwork, a chimera of ice and fire, and that brings us to the strange prophecy that echoes through Unovan legend. The prophecy of the third dragon. What happens when truth and ideals are forcibly reunited? Some ancient texts speak of a catastrophe. The original dragon was not meant to be whole again. The split was the natural outcome of a philosophical conflict that could not be resolved. To force the halves back together is to deny the very nature of truth and ideals. They are opposite poles. They can coexist, but they cannot merge without destroying what makes each pure. If both halves were absorbed into Kyurem simultaneously, if both Reshiram and Zekrom were brought into that frozen shell, what would emerge? The theory is terrifying. The original dragon would return, yes, but it would be a being driven mad by 1,000 years of separation and hatred. It would no longer be a gentle creator of kingdoms. It would be a weapon, a hollow husk filled to the brim with rage and sorrow. The DNA splicers are still out there, hidden, passed down through secret bloodlines. Some believe Team Plasma discovered their location. Others think the device is still in the giant chasm, waiting for someone to retrieve it. But one thing is certain. Kyurem will not stop seeking its missing halves. It is compelled by an ancient instinct stronger than hunger. It is a creature that cannot be complete on its own. And that loneliness, that emptiness, makes it one of the most tragic figures in all of Pokémon lore. When you stand at the edge of the giant chasm and look down into that frozen sinkhole, you feel the temperature drop. You feel the weight of the creature slumbering below, and you realize that the original dragon did not simply die when it split. It survived, cold and waiting, in a form that is as much a wound as it is a body. The question is, will that wound ever heal, or will it only grow colder as the centuries pass? That tension between life and death, between the desire to create and the urge to destroy, is about to surface in a very different way. In the next region we visit, a giant stone slept beneath a flower field for 3,000 years, waiting for two energies to awaken it, one from a cocoon that devours life, and one from a being that spreads it like a blessing. The legend of the life giver and the cocoon of destruction is perhaps the most direct story of creation and annihilation the games have ever told, and it all began with a king who built a weapon to end a war. The frozen husk of Kyurem still lingers in the giant chasm, a monument to something that was once whole. But Unova is not the only region haunted by the remnants of a fractured legend. Far to the east, in the land of Kalos, another story unfolds. One that does not speak of a single being torn apart by ideology, but of two beings locked in an eternal, silent promise. They are not enemies in the way Reshiram and Zekrom became enemies. They are opposites, yes, but their opposition is not a war. It is a cycle, a breath, a season. One of them is the life giver. The other is the cocoon of destruction. Xerneas appears as a great stag, its antlers glowing with the colours of a living forest. Emerald, sapphire, amethyst, every shade of dawn. But Xerneas does not simply look beautiful. It is the source of life itself. Not just for a single creature, but for the entire woodland, for the soil, for the roots that drink the rain. According to the oldest tales of Kalos, Xerneas has the power to grant eternal life. But nothing in nature is truly eternal, and even the stag knows this. So Xerneas sleeps. For 1,000 years, it rests within a great tree, its energy held in a dormant state, waiting for the moment when the world needs to be reborn. But if there is a life giver, there must also be a life taker. Yveltal is that counterpart. It appears as a massive bird of prey, its wings edged with darkness, its body shaped like a stylized letter Y, the letter of branching paths, of choice, of inevitable outcomes. When Yveltal dies, and it does die, it does not simply cease to exist. It absorbs the life force of every living thing around it. Every creature, every plant, every insect within its radius is drawn into a final, silent exhalation. And then Yveltal, having gathered all that energy, transforms into a cocoon, a hard shell-like structure that holds its essence until the next awakening. This is the cycle of Kalos. The region is not just a backdrop for these beings. It is the stage upon which the balance point infinite growth and total extinction is performed. Xerneas awakens, spreads life across the land for 1,000 years, and then returns to its tree. Yveltal awakens, flies across the sky, and eventually grows, old falls, and becomes a cocoon, taking everything with it. The two never meet. They do not need to. Their relationship is one of timing, not conflict. The forest grows, and then the forest dies, and then the forest grows again. Kalos understands this rhythm better than any other region because its very geography is shaped by it. The dormant states are crucial. Xerneas does not sleep in a cave or a mountain. It becomes the tree of life, a massive ancient wood that pulses with the stag's own heart. To touch that tree is to feel the pulse of every living thing that has ever been, and Yveltal's cocoon is hidden somewhere in the region, perhaps in the rugged cliffs of Terminus Cave, perhaps in the shadow of a forgotten tower. When it hatches, the cycle begins again. But the cycle has not always run smoothly. Something or someone once tried to break it. That is the story of the ultimate weapon, and that is a story we will explore in the next chapter. We have spoken of Xerneas, the life giver, and Yveltal, the cocoon of destruction, beings that slumber for 1,000 years before awakening to renew or end the world. But what happens when such forces are not left to their natural cycle, but are seized by human hands and bent to a single terrible purpose? In the region of Kalos, buried beneath the earth and etched into the very stones of a forgotten town, lies the answer. It is a story of grief so vast it reshaped a kingdom, and a weapon so absolute it scarred the land for millennia. 3,000 years ago, Kalos was ruled by a king. His name was Az. He was not a tyrant in the way history usually remembers such figures. He was a man who loved deeply, perhaps too deeply. His closest companion was a Floette, a small flower Pokémon with a red petal, a creature of gentle grace and quiet loyalty. They were inseparable. The king and his Floette walked the halls of his palace together, and the kingdom flourished under a ruler who knew tenderness. But war came. War always comes. And in that conflict, Az's Floette was struck down, her life stolen by the chaos of battle. The king's grief was not the quiet, inward kind that fades with time. It was a hot, consuming fire that burned away reason and mercy. He could not accept death. He would not accept it. In his sorrow, he conceived something that no one before him had dared to imagine. A machine that could channel the very essence of life and death into a single devastating beam. If he could not bring his Floette back, he would make the entire world feel his loss. But he needed power beyond any conventional source. He needed the immortal. Az turned to the legendary Pokémon of his land, Xerneas, the stag of eternal life, and Yveltal, the bird of destruction, were not mere guardians of the forest. They were the embodiment of the cycle that governs all living things. Xerneas gives life, Yveltal takes it. To power his weapon, the king devised a way to convert their very natures into raw energy. He captured them. Or perhaps they came to him in the chaos of war. The legends are unclear, but what is certain is that he built a machine designed to harness their opposing forces. He built the ultimate weapon. The conversion of life to energy is not a gentle process. Imagine a forest where every tree, every blade of grass, every insect and bird is suddenly drained of its vitality, its essence pulled into a single point. That is what happened on the day the weapon fired. Xerneas and Yveltal were not killed. They are eternal, but their power was siphoned, compressed, and released as a beam of pure, colourless light that tore across Kalos. The war ended in an instant. All who had taken up arms against the king were erased. The land itself was wounded, its very soil saturated with the residue of that unnatural discharge. And yet the king did not care. He had what he wanted. His Floette returned to life. The small Pokémon was resurrected by the same energy that had annihilated armies. But Floette looked upon what her master had done. The devastation, the corpses turned to dust, the earth scarred black, and she could not stay. She fled. She took the red flower she always carried and vanished into the world, leaving AZ alone with his victory and his hollow heart. The king did not die. He could not die. The weapon had not only resurrected his Floette, it had changed him. The same energy that had converted life into destruction now flowed through his veins, binding him to the earth in a way that defied nature. He became immortal, but it was not a blessing, it was a curse. Every day, every year, every century that passed, he remained the same, while everyone he knew withered and turned to dust. He wandered Kalos, a giant among smaller people, watching civilizations rise and fall, always carrying the memory of his Floette and the weight of his monstrous act. The physical evidence of the weapon's firing still exists. In present-day Kalos, there is a town called Geosenji. It is a quiet place, built around a strange formation of stones. Those stones are not natural. They are the remnants of the ultimate weapon, the conduits that focused the life into death beam. Walking among them, you can feel the history, a coldness that has nothing to do with temperature. The ground is uneven, scarred, as if the earth itself has never fully healed. Local stories speak of strange lights and sounds at night, echoes of that terrible day when a king's grief tore a hole in the fabric of the world. And what of Cernius and Yveltal? They survived. They returned to their 1,000-year slumber, their power restored, but their memory of the event etched into their very being. Xerneas, the life-giver, now knows what it feels like to have its gift stolen and weaponized. Yveltal, the cocoon of destruction, understands that its role can be perverted into something even darker than natural death. They are not evil, they are forces, but forces can be twisted. Azid's story is a warning. It is one of the most human legends in the Pokémon world, because it is not about gods or cosmic balances. It is about a man who loved too much and used that love to justify atrocity. He paid the ultimate price not in death, but in endless life. A lone giant haunted by a small flower he can never hold again. And the scars on the earth remind us that some weapons leave wounds that outlast the ones who fired them. That king still walks among us, by the way. You can find him in Kalos, a towering figure in a black jacket, standing by a fountain in a city called Lumios. He does not speak much. He waits. He hopes that one day his Floette will return to him. The cycle of grief never truly ends, and neither does the legacy of the ultimate weapon. But the world does not stop turning after such a catastrophe. Life finds a way to rebalance itself. Nature, after all, has its own order, its own checks and balances, and it does not tolerate disruptions forever. What happens when the natural order itself decides to enforce its rules? Not through a machine, but through creatures born to maintain the balance of the ecosystem. That is a mystery we must explore next, as we follow the threads from the scarred earth of Kalos to the quiet guardians of the wild. The great weapon of Kalos had been silenced. 3,000 years of grief and destruction, all condensed into a single moment when a king's love and a machine's hunger tore the life from an entire region. Xerneas and Yveltal had been used as fuel, their essences drained to power a device that could end a war by ending everything. But when the weapon fell dormant, when Azid finally found his Floette and laid down his burden, the world did not return to a simple peace. It returned to a delicate balance, one that required a guardian who had been watching all along. Deep beneath the earth of Kalos, in the absolute black of Terminus Cave, something stirred, not with haste, not with rage, but with a patient awareness that had been waiting since long before the war. Zygarde, the order of the ecosystem. If Cernius gave life and Yveltal harvested death, Zygarde was the one who ensured that the cycle never broke. It did not rule over nature like a king. It monitored nature like a nervous system, spread across the entire planet in fragments no larger than a human hand. These fragments are called cells, and there are tens of thousands of them. Each one is a tiny piece of Zygarde's consciousness, scattered across the soil, the rivers, the forests, the mountains. They do not think individually. They do not act. They simply sense. A cell in the glittering cave feels the temperature of the air. A cell in the azure bay tastes the salt of the tide. A cell on the highest peak of Terminus Cave listens to the vibrations of the earth. Every single one of them feeds its information to a central processor, a core, and the core, the true mind of Zygarde, sits in the dark, waiting. It is a hive mind, but not one that controls. It is a hive mind that observes. Zygarde does not intervene unless the balance is threatened. It does not care about human wars or ancient machines, not directly. But when the ecosystem itself begins to destabilize, when the natural order is pushed toward collapse, Zygarde knows. The cells call out to one another. They begin to move, to converge, to assemble. And what emerges from that assembly is not a single creature, but a form shaped by the severity of the threat. At 10% power, Zygarde appears as a small serpentine creature, almost dog-like, with a green and black body and a single eye. It can move quickly, it can communicate, but it is not yet ready to fight. It is more like a scout, a preliminary response to confirm the danger. When the situation escalates, when the cells gather further, Zygarde reaches its 50% form, a towering coiled serpent, muscular and imposing, with two heads and a central crest that pulses with green energy. This is the form that most legends describe, the guardian that patrols the land, the enforcer of equilibrium. At 50%, Zygarde can command the earth itself, using powerful moves like Thousand Arrows to ground even flying foes, and Land's Wrath to reshape the battlefield. It is enough to handle most threats, most disturbances, most imbalances. But there is a reason Zygarde rarely reveals its full power. The 100% form, the complete forme, is a construct of immense energy. It looks nothing like a serpent. It rises on two legs, a humanoid titan, with a chest that glows with the combined will of every cell, wings of green hexagonal plates, and a core that burns like a miniature sun. This form is not meant for patrol or for minor corrections. It is an emergency response, a final line of defense. Zygarde only assembles its complete power when the entire ecosystem is in peril, when the damage is so widespread that local solutions are meaningless. The war in Kalos did not trigger it, because the war, however terrible, was human. But if the climate itself were to break, if the very fabric of life were to unravel, Zygarde would rise, and it would judge. This is why Zygarde's influence extends beyond Kalos. Alola, the tropical region across the ocean, also knows of Zygarde. The island guardian Tapas watch over their own domains. But Zygarde operates on a scale that transcends regions. Cells have been discovered in Alola's caves and forests, evidence that this watcher has no borders. It is not a god of one land, it is a system of the entire planet. When environmental imbalance spreads from one region to another, Zygarde follows. It adapts. It assembles where it is needed. And yet, for all its power, Zygarde remains silent. It does not communicate with humans. It does not explain its decisions. The only sign that it exists is the occasional tremor in Terminus Cave, the faint hum of a cell buried in the dirt, or the sudden appearance of a green serpent on the horizon when the world's natural order is threatened. It is a protector that does not desire recognition, a guardian that works without gratitude. It simply watches, and when the time comes, it acts. But even a watcher can be caught off guard. Even the order of the ecosystem can be disrupted by a force that does not belong to this world, a light that failed, a star that dimmed, and a darkness that entered from beyond the sky. That story begins where the light died, and it begins in Alola. From the silent vigil of Zygarde beneath Kalos, we turn our gaze to a different kind of balance, one shattered not by war or ecosystem collapse, but by starvation. There is a being that once was light itself, a radiant entity that traveled the void between dimensions, bringing illumination to every world it touched. But something went terribly wrong. That being is Necrozma, and its story is one of the most tragic in all of Pokémon lore. Necrozma's hunger is not a simple appetite. It is a desperate, maddening need born from the loss of its own essence. Once, it was known as the Blinding One, a creature of pure light that nourished entire civilizations. But then its light was stolen, drained away by those who sought to harness its power. What remained was a hollow shell, a crystalline body that no longer glowed but instead consumed. Necrozma became a parasite of photons, driven by an insatiable craving for the very energy it once gave freely. In its madness, it no longer remembered its purpose, only the ache of emptiness that could never be filled. Consider the world called Ultra Megalopolis. This is a city built in perpetual darkness, its people living their entire lives under an artificial twilight. They did not choose this existence. Long ago, their ancestors worshipped Necrozma as a god, a source of endless radiance that turned night into day. But when they took too much of its light, when they broke the sacred bond, the being shattered, its fragments rained down, and the light was extinguished. The Ultra Megalopolis was left to survive in shadow, its inhabitants forever haunted by the memory of a son that had died. They built towers and machines to capture what little residual energy remained, but it was never enough. They became a civilization of mourners, waiting for a miracle that would never come. To understand how Necrozma steals light, you must understand its prism armor. Its body is not a solid shell, but a lattice of crystalline facets, each one capable of refracting and absorbing electromagnetic radiation. When Necrozma encounters another Pokémon, especially those rich in energy, like Solgaleo or Lunala, it doesn't attack with brute force. Instead, it bends the light around them, drawing their essence into its own core. The more it absorbs, the more its facets glow, but the glow is borrowed. It fades almost as quickly as it appears, leaving Necrozma hungrier than before. This is the tragedy of its existence. No matter how much light it consumes, it can never fill the void left by its original self. And then, there is the terrifying return of the Blinding One. When Necrozma absorbs enough energy, when it merges with the radiant light of a legendary, it undergoes a transformation. It becomes Ultra Necrozma. This form is not just a power-up, it is a reversion to its original godlike state, but twisted by eons of hunger and rage. Its body erupts with blinding white light, and its eyes burn like twin stars. In this form, Necrozma no longer seeks just survival. It seeks to reclaim everything that was stolen, and in doing so, it threatens the very fabric of the multiverse. Ultra Necrozma can tear through dimensions, collapsing ultra space and ordinary space together. It is a force of cosmic imbalance, a warning of what happens when a creator becomes a destroyer. But even as Necrozma rages, there are others who watch from the shadows of ultra space. They are not gods, but travelers, beings who move between worlds, carrying with them secrets that could either heal the universe or shatter it further. Their story is one of passage and peril, and it will lead us into the deepest corridors of the unknown. Next, in Chapter 17, we will follow those who journey through the rifts, the ones who dare to step into the endless dark between dimensions. They are the travelers of ultraspace, and so we find ourselves still in the darkness of Ultra Megalopolis, a city that lost its light, a civilization forever grateful to the being that shattered, the one they call Necrozma. But Necrozma was not always a creature of hunger and shadow. Once it was a bringer of light, a traveler between worlds, and in the same deep reaches of ultraspace, there are other travelers, beings that do not steal light, but devour stars themselves. These are the creatures known as Solgaleo and Lunala, the so-called beasts that devour the sun and the moon. Their titles are not poetic metaphors. They are literal descriptions of their cosmic hunger. Solgaleo, the steely lion with a mane of molten radiance, is said to consume the sun, drawing its energy into itself until it becomes a blazing furnace of stellar power. Lunala, the ghostly bat with wings like the crescent moon, devours the moon, drinking in its pale light and growing into a being of shadow and silver. Where do they come from? Not from our world, not from the sky above Alola, but from a dimension beyond, ultraspace itself. These two legendaries are native to the same extra-dimensional realm that gave rise to Necrozma, yet they are not predators. They are travelers, navigators, keys. They move between dimensions by tearing open the fabric of reality, creating what we call ultra wormholes. These wormholes are not random rifts. They are passages that can only be opened by the power of Solgaleo or Lunala. In Alola mythology, these beasts were said to appear when the world needed to be bridged to another, when a chosen one stood at the altar of the sun, or the altar of the moon. Those altars are ancient stone structures, one on each of Alola's 4 islands, or rather, the ruins of them. The altar of the Sunny sits atop a mountain on Ulaula Island, a place where the sky meets the earth. The altar of the moon is hidden in a crater on Pony Island, surrounded by mist and silence. These were not built by humans alone. Legends say they were constructed by the first people, who learned to communicate with the beasts of the sun and moon, and that at the peak of a certain celestial alignment, the altars would hum with energy. When a trainer stood there with the right being, the beast would descend and open a gateway, a portal into the swirling colours of ultraspace. But here lies the strangest part of this story. Solgaleo and Lunala do not simply appear as full-grown legendaries, they evolve. They are the rare instance of a legendary Pokémon possessing a juvenile form, a tiny, fragile creature known as Cosmog. Cosmog is almost laughably small, a wisp of purple gas with 2 tiny eyes and a starry body. It has no real power, no attacks worthy of a legendary. It is, in the words of Alolan scholars, a mere nebula given form, a drifting cloud of potential. Yet this little being is the embryo of either a sun-devouring lion or a moon-devouring bat. How does such a transformation occur? The answer lies in the 2 altars. When Cosmog is brought to the altar of the sun during the day, it absorbs the light of the sun and evolves into Cosmoem, a dormant crystal shell that glows with internal heat. Then, after enough energy is accumulated, Cosmoem sheds its shell at a specific moment, a sunrise over the altar of the sun, and becomes Solgaleo. The same process happens at the altar of the moon at night, producing Lunala. This evolution cycle is unlike any other in the Pokémon world. It is not triggered by experience or a stone, but by the alignment of celestial bodies and ancient technology. The altars themselves are likely remnants of a much older civilization, one that understood the nature of ultraspace long before modern science. They recognized that Solgaleo and Lunala are not just powerful beings. They are the keys to the multiverse. When Solgaleo or Lunala opens an ultra wormhole, it does not simply create a tear in the sky. It pulls the traveler into a realm of pure energy, where time flows differently and distance is meaningless. The wormhole leads to other dimensions, Ultra Megalopolis, the home of Necrozma, or even stranger places like the Ultra Deep Sea, where reality is liquid and light bends around unseen shapes. Without these beasts, reaching those dimensions is nearly impossible. They are the only known way to cross the boundaries of our universe without being consumed. And yet these beings are not gods. They are wanderers, drawn to light and shadow, to the cycles of day and night. They do not rule over space or time. They simply move through it, and in moving, they allow others to follow. This is why Alola's guardian spirits, the Tapu, watch over the islands so carefully. They know that the presence of a beast that devours the sun or moon can attract unwanted attention from ultraspace. Too many wormholes, and the fabric of Alola itself might become unstable. So we leave the travelers of ultraspace, these sun-eaters and moon-drinkers, standing at the threshold of possibility. But Alola has other guardians, older ones, who do not wander dimensions but anchor themselves in the land and sea. They are the island's true protectors. Their story is one of silence, judgment, and the hidden price of balance. We left off with the travelers of ultraspace, Solgaleo, the beast that devours the sun, and Lunala, the one that cools the moon. Beings of light and shadow, born from the same cosmic egg, the same tiny cosmog that drifts between dimensions. But Alola does not belong to those celestial wanderers. The islands have their own protectors, older than any visitor from beyond. They are the Tapu, and they are not here to comfort you. The Tapu are the guardians of Alola, Tapu Koko of Melemele, Tapu Lele of Akala, Tapu Bulu of Ulula, and Tapu Fini of Pony. Each watches over a specific island, but they do not watch with patient, benevolent eyes. They are mercurial, they are fickle, and that is precisely why they are so terrifying. The people of Alola know this. They build shrines not to honor the Tapu, but to appease them. A child who wanders too close to a guardian's ruins may feel a sudden gust of wind knock them off their feet, or hear a low hum that vibrates in their chest. A warning. The Tapu decide who is worthy, and they do not explain their reasoning. You see, the Tapu's nature is not evil, but it is not tame either. Tapu Koko, for example, has been known to rescue drowning children, carrying them to shore on its shell. It has also been known to strike down a perfectly innocent fisherman with a bolt of lightning, simply because he sailed too close to its nesting grounds. Tapu Lele spreads glittering scales that heal wounds, but those scales also cause violent, uncontrollable laughter in those who do not respect her presence. Tapu Bulu grants fertile soil to farmers who leave offerings, and then demands that no fruit ever be taken without a prayer. And Tapu Fini, the most mysterious of them all, creates dense, suffocating fog that hides the truth, but also reveals it to those brave enough to enter. The Tapu are not gods of love. They are gods of balance, and balance is rarely comfortable. But the Tapu's true test came not from within Alola, but from beyond, when the ultra wormholes tore open the sky, and the ultra beasts began to seep through. Creatures like Nihilego, Buzzwole, Pheromosa. It was the Tapu who stood at the front lines. They did not fight alone. The islanders, the trial captains, even the kahunas joined the defense. But the Tapu were the first line. They understood what the humans could not. The ultra beasts were not mindless invaders. They were lost, disoriented refugees from a world without light. But understanding does not stop a war. The Tapu's powers, drawn from the very essence of Alola, repelled the intruders. Tapu Koko summoned storms of electric energy that pushed back the swarms. Tapu Fini shrouded the islands in mist that confused the beast's senses. Tapu Bulu rooted the land itself, creating barriers of thorn and vine. And Tapu Lele, she healed the wounded, but only those she deemed worthy. The war was not long, but it was brutal, and after it ended, the Tapu retreated deeper into their ruins, as if to say, "We have done our part, now do not forget." That war also revealed something deeper about the power the Tapu wield. The Z crystals, those glowing stones that allow a trainer to channel nature's fury into a single devastating move. They are pieces of the Tapu's own spirit. Each crystal is a fragment of the Guardian's energy, given freely to those who prove their heart is pure, but the giving is conditional. The Tapu do not hand out Z crystals like candy. A trainer must undergo the island challenge, face the grand trials, and earn the respect of the Guardians. Even then, the Tapu may choose to withhold. The Z power is not a tool to be used lightly. It is a pact. When you hold a Z crystal, you hold a piece of a volatile ancient will, and if you misuse it, the Tapu can take it back. Some say they have done so before, leaving a trainer powerless in the middle of a battle as a lesson, which brings us to the ruins themselves. The Tapu reside in sacred shrines scattered across Alola. The ruins of conflict on Melemele, the ruins of life on Akala, the ruins of abundance on Ulaula, and the ruins of hope on Pony. These ruins are not mere temples, they are scars. They were built on the sites of ancient battles, some against other legendary forces, some against the very earth itself when Alola was formed. The ruins of conflict, for example, are said to mark the place where Tapu Koko brought a being of pure destruction from beyond the stars, long before humans ever settled the islands. The stone walls still crackle with residual static, and in the ruins of life, the stones are warm to the touch, as if Tapu Lele's healing energy still pulses beneath the floor. The ruins are where the Tapu judge humanity. They observe visitors from hidden alcoves. They whisper in the wind. If you enter with arrogance, you may find the door sealed behind you. If you enter with humility, you may feel a gentle breeze guiding your path. So the Tapu are not heroes in the way we usually imagine. They are not saviors who smile and wave. They are the island's immune system, sometimes protective, sometimes aggressive, always unpredictable. They defended Alola from the Ultra Beasts, but they also remind the people that their protection is not guaranteed. It must be earned every day with respect and vigilance. And as we drift further into the night, let us not forget that there are other regions with their own sleeping titans. One such calamity lies beneath the earth of Galar, waiting for a moment when the sky turns dark and the ground shakes with unnatural energy. That moment would come to be known as the darkest day, and it would change everything about how we understand the line between legend and disaster. But that is a story for another night. For now, let the mist of Pony Island settle over your thoughts, and let the rhythm of the waves carry you deeper into sleep. The Tapus of Alola kept their islands safe from Ultra Beasts, but their protection was never gentle. It was territorial, fickle, and deeply tied to the land itself. You could feel safe, as long as you respected the boundaries they had drawn. But what happens when the threat does not come from another dimension? What happens when it falls from the sky, carrying the weight of a forgotten star and a hunger that could consume an entire region? In Galar, the answer is written in the scars of a single event known as the Darkest Day. It began not in a laboratory or a palace, but in the emptiness above the world. A meteor, ancient, impossibly massive, plunged through the atmosphere and struck the earth with a force that reshaped the land. But this was not a simple rock. What fell that day was a creature, or rather a fragment of a much larger being, one that had travelled through the void, for reasons no one has ever fully understood. That being was called Eternatus, and its arrival was the first domino in a chain of catastrophes that would define Galar for millennia. When the meteor hit, it shattered. Pieces of it scattered across the region, buried deep in the soil, embedded in the mountains, hidden in the rivers. These pieces were small, but they held an extraordinary power. They became known as wishing stars, though named because of the faint, wishful glow they emitted, as if each shard still remembered the light of its home. And here is the strange truth. Those wishing stars were not mere energy sources. They were fragments of Eternatus's own body, shed like scales or broken bones. Every single one of them was alive, and when people began to collect them, to hold them, to use them, something awakened. The power within those shards turned out to be the key to a phenomenon that would become Galar's defining feature: Dynamax. When a Pokémon is exposed to enough concentrated wishing star energy, it grows to colossal proportions, its body surging with red and purple light. It becomes a giant, a living storm of raw, unstoppable force. At first, this was seen as a blessing. Galar's stadiums were built to contain these battles, and the region's gym challenge revolved around mastering this power. Champions rose and fell, and the people celebrated the spectacle. But they did not ask why the wishing stars worked this way. They did not wonder what Eternatus truly wanted. That question would not be answered until centuries later, when a man named Rose looked at the growing energy crisis and saw a solution that was far too simple and far too dangerous. Rose was the chairman of the Galar Pokémon League, a visionary and an industrialist. He saw that the wishing stars were finite, and that without them, Dynamax would fade, and the region's energy grid would collapse. So he turned his gaze to the source. He studied old legends, dug through ancient ruins, and discovered the truth that had been buried since the meteor fell. Eternatus was still there, deep beneath the earth, dormant and waiting, and its power was bottomless. Rose believed he could harness Eternatus's limitless energy to solve every future problem Galar would ever face. But the legend was not a story of gratitude. Eternatus was not a gift. It was a parasite, an alien entity that fed on the life force of the planet itself. When Rose activated a device in the Rose Tower, he did not summon a peaceful power plant. He ripped open a wound in the world, and the darkest day began again. The sky turned black. Gigantic Pokémon appeared everywhere, not in controlled stadium battles, but in the streets, in the forests, over the cities. They were not obeying any trainer. They were simply manifestations of uncontrolled Dynamax energy, unleashed by Eternatus' awakening. And at the center of it all, Eternatus itself rose from the earth. A dragon-like form so vast it seemed to devour the horizon. It was not just a threat to Galar. Eternatus represents a threat to the very fabric of time and space. Because its power is not limited by the laws of this world, it pulls energy from beyond, from a dimension where the rules are different. If it had been allowed to fully emerge, it could have unraveled reality as easily as a thread pulled from a tapestry. The heroes who faced it, two trainers wielding the legendary artifacts known as the Sword and the Shield, managed to seal Eternatus once more, but the scars of that day remain. The Rose Tower stands empty, a monument to ambition's folly. The wishing stars are still there, hidden in the ground, waiting, and Eternatus, now contained, still breathes in a capsule, its hunger never satisfied. But the story does not end there. The sword and the shield that were used to stop the darkest day were not merely symbols. They were forged from something older, something that had been waiting long before the meteor ever fell. And the legend of that forging, and the two legendary Pokémon who became the region's protectors, is a mystery that still holds the truth of Galar's deepest past. That is a tale for another night, when we turn our attention to the hidden history of the sword and the shield. I hope you're as amazed by this as I am. If you want to stay updated on more content like this, make sure to subscribe and join our community of curious minds. Trust me, what's coming next will challenge everything you thought you knew. The previous chapter left us at the end of the darkest day, with Eternatus sealed away, and Galar saved by a power that seemed to come from nowhere. But that rescue was not an accident. It was the return of something ancient, something that had been sleeping in a forest so deep and so forgotten that even the people of Galar had begun to doubt it ever existed. There is a story that runs beneath the surface of the region, a story of two wolves, a sword, a shield, and a partnership that transcends mere training. Zacian and Zamazenta, the forgotten heroes of the Galar region's founding. Their names are carved into the oldest stones, but time has worn the inscriptions down to whispers. Most children in Galar learn about the legend of the hero who wielded a mighty sword and the other who carried an impenetrable shield. They hear that these two beings fought together to defeat a great evil that threatened to consume the land. And then the story goes, they vanished. They did not die, at least not in any conventional sense. They retreated to a place where the boundary between the world and legend is thin, a place where the mist never quite lifts. This place is the Slumbering Weald, a forest lost in mist where the legends went to die. The Weald is not a friendly forest. It is dense, silent, and suffused with an ancient melancholy. The trees grow close together, their branches twisting into shapes that seem to hold back secrets. The mist is not a weather pattern. It is a shield, a veil woven by time itself to protect what lies within. For centuries, no one dared venture deep. Travelers who entered sometimes emerged hours later with no memory of what they saw, feeling as though they had walked through a dream. Others never came back at all, and so the Weald became a place of superstition, a place to avoid. But the truth is that something was waiting there, something that had been wounded in the battle against the darkness. Zacian and Zamazenta had given everything to stop Eternatus. They had used their own bodies as the final line of defense, and in doing so, they broke. Their power was spent. Their forms, once radiant and crowned with light, became dull and worn. They needed to rest. They needed to heal. And so they entered the Slumbering Weald, and they did not leave. But they did not simply sleep. They left behind a piece of themselves, a legacy that the people of Galar would one day need. That legacy took the form of two objects, a rusted sword and a rusted shield. At first glance, they look like nothing more than corroded scraps of metal, discarded by some forgotten warrior. The rust flakes off when touched. The edges are blunt. The shield is cracked. They seem worthless, but these are not ordinary tools. They are the relics of the wolves themselves, the very weapons they wielded in their true forms. When Zacian fought the darkest day, she carried a sword that could cut through the fabric of reality. Zamazenta bore a shield that could withstand the full force of a dying star. After their sacrifice, the weapons lost their luster, became ordinary, became rusted, but the power was not gone. It was hidden, waiting for a hand worthy of restoring it. And that is where the bond with humanity enters the story. These wolves, Zacian and Zamazenta, are among the most powerful beings ever to walk the Pokémon world. They are legendary in every sense of the word, yet they cannot reach their full potential alone. In their base forms, they are formidable, fast and strong, but they are not the heroes of legend. They are weary, diminished echoes of what they once were. To become the crowned forms that history speaks of, they must trust a human partner. They must be willing to pick up the rusted sword and the rusted shield, to let a trainer hold those broken relics in their hands. And then, something extraordinary happens. The moment a worthy trainer holds those items, the rust begins to flake away. The metal beneath glows with a light that is not of this world. The sword becomes a gleaming blade of pure silver. The shield becomes a polished wall of ancient gold. And the wolves themselves change. They transform, growing taller, more regal, their fur taking on a metallic sheen. They are crowned. This transformation is not just physical, it is a reflection of a deep truth about Galar itself. The region was built on partnership, on the cooperation between humans and Pokémon. From the earliest days, people and Pokémon worked together to survive the harsh winters, to build the first settlements, to tame the wilds. The bond between a trainer and their Pokémon is not a convenience, it is the core of the culture. And in the case of Zacian and Zamazenta, that bond is not optional. They will not accept just anyone. They have waited for centuries, testing the souls of those who ventured into the slumbering weald. They look for courage, for compassion, for a willingness to stand between the innocent and the darkness. They look for someone who understands that the sword and shield are not just weapons, they are symbols. The sword represents the strength to fight for what is right. The shield represents the resolve to protect those who cannot protect themselves. And when both are held by the same person, the wolves know they have found their partner. That is why the slumbering weald remained a mystery for so long. It was not that the legends had died, it was that they were waiting for the right moment to be reborn. And when the darkest day threatened to return, when Eternatus stirred again, the mist finally began to lift. A young trainer from Postwick, guided by fate, or perhaps by the wolves themselves, walked into the weald. They found the rusted sword and rusted shield lying in the grass as if they had been left there for them. And when they lifted those objects, the wolves emerged from the shadows of the forest, their eyes glowing with recognition. The forgotten heroes of Galar's founding were no longer forgotten. They were home. But there is more to this story than a single battle. The rusted sword and rusted shield are not merely tools of combat. They are conduits for divine power. The word divine is not used lightly. Zacian and Zamazenta are not just powerful Pokémon. They are embodiments of ideals that existed long before Galar was a region. The sword represents the absolute purity of a warrior's spirit. The shield represents the unyielding commitment to defense. When a human holds these objects, they are not just holding metal, they are holding the accumulated will of centuries of protection, the very essence of what it means to be a hero. The power flows through them, into the wolves, and back into the world. It is a cycle, a symbiosis that transforms all three parties. And yet, for all their power, Zacian and Zamazenta chose to remain in the weald after their original victory. They did not seek glory. They did not want statues or songs. They wanted peace. The slumbering weald became their sanctuary, a place where time moved slowly and the noise of the world could not reach them. But the mist that protected them also kept the truth hidden. The people of Galar forgot. They built towns, they developed technology, They discovered Dynamax energy from the fragments of Eternatus's body. They forgot that the very energy they were using came from the enemy the wolves had defeated. And when that energy began to spiral out of control, when the darkest day came again, the wolves had to awaken. Their bond with humanity saved Galar a second time, and this time, perhaps, the lesson will be remembered. The wolves are not gods to be worshipped. They are partners to be trusted, and the rusted sword and rusted shield are not artifacts to be locked in a museum. They are keys to a power that only works when it is shared. As the mist settles again over the slumbering Weald, one might wonder what other legends are waiting in the quiet corners of the world. There is a story that speaks of a king who ruled not with iron and fire, but with a gentle hand, a king who commanded the very bounty of the earth to bloom. That tale, too, is woven into the fabric of a region far from Galar, and it has a secret that will change everything you thought you knew about the relationship between Pokémon and the land they inhabit. But that is a story for another night. For now, the wolves rest. The sword and shield are laid to rest in the hands of a trainer who understands, and the bond between human and Pokémon holds firm. The heroes of Galar, Zacian and Zamazenta, faded into legend, their names whispered only in the mist of the slumbering Weald. But that forest holds another story, one even older, buried deeper in the frozen north of the Crown Tundra, a story about a king who lost everything, not to battle but to silence, the king of bountiful harvests, Calyrex. You see, long before Galar knew the darkest day, before its people built cities and stadiums, the Crown Tundra belonged to a sovereign of a very different kind, not a king of stone and steel, but a ruler of life itself. Calyrex was a legendary Pokémon that commanded the seasons, that coaxed fruit from the coldest soil. Its people, the ancient Galarians who lived in the tundra's valleys, thrived under its care. They built shrines and sang songs in its honor, and in return, Calyrex made the land bloom. But legends say the king's power was never about force. It was about providence. There was a time when a terrible famine threatened the entire region. The soil turned barren, and the winds grew bitter. Calyrex, seeing its people starve, did something impossible. In a single night it moved an entire forest. Not metaphorically. It physically lifted the trees, the earth, the roots, and transplanted them across the mountains to a warmer valley where crops could grow. The forest that now blankets the southern part of the Crown Tundra is not wild growth. It is a garden planted by a god in the dark, one night of desperate mercy. That forest still stands, a silent testament to a power we can barely comprehend. But power, no matter how great, cannot survive without faith. And that is the tragedy of Calyrex. As generations passed, the people of the Crown Tundra forgot their king. They stopped building shrines. They stopped singing. They moved south into the bustling cities of Galar, and the name Calyrex became a folktale, a whisper, nothing more. What happens to a legendary Pokémon when its followers forget its name? It fades. Not physically, but spiritually. Calyrex retreated into isolation, its once boundless energy dimming. It became a ghost of itself. A lost sovereign wandering the frozen tundra, waiting for someone to remember. That is where the steeds come in, Glastria and Spectria, two powerful Pokémon, each a fragment of Calyrex's former glory. Glastria, the wild horse of ice, carries the king's untamed strength. Spectria, the phantom of shadow, holds its sorrow and its solitude. They are not mere mounts. They are pieces of a broken crown, and to tame one of them, to truly bond with them, requires more than a trainer's skill. It requires the Reins of Unity, a psychic artifact woven from pure trust. The bond between Calyrex and its steed is not a leash. It is a shared mind, a merging of two souls. Only when a trainer proves worthy of that bond can Calyrex step out of the shadows and once again become the king it was born to be. And yet, even with a steed at its side, Calyrex is still a legend whispered to sleep. The people of Galar have moved on, chasing new wonders, new disasters. The Crown Tundra remains a cold, forgotten corner, and the forest that Calyrex moved in that single night still grows, silently, patiently, waiting for a faith that may never return. But somewhere deep in that tundra, something else is waiting. A crater, a secret buried so deep that even the soil itself has forgotten what it holds. And in Paldea, another story of loss and providence is about to unfold, one that will ask a very different question about the nature of power and the cost of memory. From the frozen peaks of the Crown Tundra, we now travel south, far south, to a region where the Earth itself holds a secret older than any kingdom. The Paldea region is defined by its great crater, a wound in the land so vast that it shapes the entire geography around it. But this is no ordinary impact site. This is Area Zero, a geological anomaly at the heart of the region where time behaves strangely. You see, the crater is not a scar from a falling star. It is a gateway, a place where the layers of reality have worn thin. Scientists and explorers who have ventured into its depths report anomalies that defy explanation. Clocks run faster or slower without warning. Plants grow in impossible cycles, blooming and withering within the same hour. And deep within the caverns, something pulses with a light that is not quite natural. That light is the source of terrestrial energy, a phenomenon unique to Paldea. The terra crystals that form across the region are not mere rocks. They are living structures, biological and geological in equal measure, and they seem to respond to the presence of Pokémon in ways that suggest consciousness. When a Pokémon terrestrializes, it is not just being coated in crystal, it is being infused with a concentrated dose of the crater's mysterious energy, a power that can change a creature's type, its very essence, as if the crystal is rewriting its code. But the true mystery of Area Zero runs much deeper, for within its forbidden depths, researchers have discovered creatures that should not exist. They call them paradox Pokémon, beings that appear to be living fossils from the ancient past, or visitors from a distant future. A dinosaur-like relative of Donphan, armoured and primal, a robotic version of Delibird, sleek and metallic. Are these truly time travellers, plucked from different eras by the crater's temporal instability, or are they something else entirely? This is the question that consumed two brilliant minds, Professor Sada and Professor Turo. They were the leading experts on terrestrial energy, and both became obsessed with the paradox phenomenon. Their research was a tragic quest to bridge the gap between eras, to use the power of Area Zero to summon beings from beyond the present. But the cost was immense. Sada believed that the past held the key to a purer, more natural world. Turo believed that the future offered a path of technological evolution. Their visions diverged, and their partnership shattered. In the end, both disappeared into the crater, leaving behind only their notes, their Pokémon, and a warning that the exploration of time comes with a price no researcher should have to pay. What did they find down there? Did their machines actually succeed in opening portals to other times? Or did the crater simply reflect their own imaginations, creating tangible forms from their deepest desires and fears? The paradox Pokémon are real, that much is certain. But whether they are authentic echoes of history or optical illusions given flesh remains one of the great unsolved riddles of the Pokémon world. The answer may lie deeper still, hidden beneath the crystalline floor of Area Zero, where a treasure older than any legend waits. That is the story we will uncover next, when we descend into the heart of the crater and face the being that has slept there since before memory began. The previous chapter left us standing at the edge of Area Zero, staring into a crater where time itself seemed to bend, where paradox Pokémon flickered between past and future, real and imagined. But even that mystery was only a shadow of something deeper, because buried far beneath the crater's crystalline floor, sealed in a cavern that no ordinary light could reach, there rested a creature that held the memory of the entire planet within its shell. This was the true hidden treasure of Area Zero. Not a weapon, not a source of infinite energy, but a living chronicle. A turtle made of crystal, whose name is Terrapagos. Terrapagos is the embodiment of the terrestrial phenomenon, that strange, shimmering transformation that Paldea's Pokémon undergo when exposed to terra crystals. You've seen it. The glowing crowns, the jewel-like forms, the sudden shift in elemental power. But what you haven't seen is the source. Every Terra crystal in Paldea, every burst of terrestrial energy, traces back to one being, Terrapagos, a Pokémon so ancient that its shell predates the continents, a creature so deeply tied to the land that when it stirs, the earth itself remembers, and when it awakens fully, it reveals a form that transcends the 18 known types, the stellar form. This is not simply a new type, it is the original type, the one from which all others were born, or into which they can be folded. A stellar Terra type allows a Pokémon's moves to resonate to frequency that breaks the normal rules of effectiveness. It is a power that was never meant to be controlled, a power that in the hands of the wrong explorer could unravel the very fabric of the type chart. But Terrapagos does not grant this power lightly. To even glimpse its stellar form, you must first prove that you understand the cost of memory, because Terrapagos does not just store energy, it stores history, the eternal memory, every event that has ever occurred on this planet, every birth, every extinction, every war, every whisper of wind across a field is etched into the facets of its crystalline shell. The shell is not merely a defense, it is a library, a vast, silent record of all that has been and all that has been forgotten. When Terrapagos sleeps, and it sleeps for millennia, it dreams the world's past, and when it wakes, it can replay those dreams. But there is a danger in such absolute knowledge. To touch that memory is to risk losing yourself in the weight of everything that has ever happened. This is where the folklore of the hidden treasure takes a darker turn. The people of ancient Paldea knew of Terrapagos. They called it the treasure that lies beneath, but they also whispered that a treasure that should never be unearthed. Stories say that the crater was formed not by a meteor or a volcanic collapse, but by the land swallowing itself to keep Terrapagos hidden. The connection to the underworld is not a metaphor. In some texts, Area Zero is described as the mouth of the underworld, a passage that leads not to death, but to the raw, unshaped memory of the earth. Those who descended in search of the treasure did not always return, and those who did return were never quite the same. They spoke in fragments, as if their minds had been overwritten by echoes from ages long past. The Indigo Disc, the massive crystalline platform at the heart of the deepest chamber, is the seal. It is both a door and a lock, and when Terrapagos is finally brought into the light, when the disc is activated, the treasure is not simply found, it is unleashed. The stellar energy that bursts forth does not discriminate. It transforms everything it touches, Pokémon and environment alike, into something that exists outside the normal rules of nature. This is the true cost of the hidden treasure. A power that cannot be confined, a memory that cannot be erased, and a responsibility that cannot be shared. So as we close this chapter on Area Zero, remember that the deepest secrets of Paldea are not found in paradox Pokémon or ancient technology. They are locked within the shell of a turtle that has watched this world from the very beginning. And if that shell ever cracks, if that memory ever spills out unchecked, what will be left of the world we know? Because the treasure beneath the crater is not the only hidden thing in Paldea. There are others, sealed away with even less mercy, waiting for someone foolish enough to break the locks. And they are known as the Treasures of Ruin. The crystalline heart of Area Zero revealed a power that defies the very boundaries of type itself. Terrapagos, the hidden treasure, a being of pure stellar energy. But if Terrapagos represents a transcendence of limits, then there is another set of legends in Paldea that represents something far more unsettling: the absolute corruption of human desire. These are the Treasures of Ruin, and they are not born from the earth or the stars. They were made by human hands. Long before the Great Crater was formed, before the Indigo Disc was ever conceived, Paldea was ruled by a king who amassed great wealth. He coveted power in all its forms, and he commissioned the creation of 4 magnificent artifacts: a set of wooden tablets inscribed with grievances, a sword of terrifying sharpness, a vessel shaped to hold offerings, and a set of gleaming beads. These were meant to be symbols of his dominion, that the king did not understand the nature of the emotions he was channeling. The tablets were carved with the resentments of his enemies. The vessel was filled with the greedy offerings of his subjects, and the beads were heated by the envy of those who wished to possess them. Human greed and hatred are not passive forces, they are living things, and when concentrated into physical objects, they began to stir. The artifacts did not remain inert, they became vessels for something ancient and terrible. The collective malice of everyone who had ever coveted, resented, or destroyed in the name of the king, and in time these artifacts awakened. They transformed into living disasters. The first to stir was a being born from the tablets of grievances. Its body is a set of ancient wooden planks, bound together by dark creeping vines. It is known as Wo-Shin, and it represents the sin of resentment. Every grudge ever written upon those tablets became its veins. Every bitter word etched into the wood now whispers through its leaves. It moves slowly, deliberately, spreading a sense of despair wherever it treads. To encounter Wo-Shin is to feel the weight of every unresolved anger in the world pressing down upon your chest. Then there is the sword, not merely a weapon, but a blade forged from the hatred of 1,000 battlefields. Its name is Qianpao, and it is the embodiment of malice. The sword is sheathed in an aura of pure cruelty. It does not simply cut flesh, it cuts through hope. Those who have glimpsed it describe a chilling cold that radiates from its edge, not a physical cold, but a spiritual one. The frost of heart that has never known mercy. Qianpao is the sin of violence given form. The vessel, once used to collect offerings of wealth, became something else entirely. It grew legs, a massive stone body, and a cavernous mouth that hungers endlessly. This is Tinglu, the sin of greed. It does not attack out of anger, it consumes out of insatiable want. Everything around it is drawn into its orbit, pulled toward that endless void where nothing is ever enough. Tinglu is the sound of a kingdom's treasure being swallowed whole, never to be seen again. And the beads, 4 glowing orbs that once symbolized the king's favor, now burning with the heat of envy. They are Qiyu, the sin of jealousy. Qiyu is small and deceptively beautiful, its beads emitting a flickering light that draws the eye. But that light burns. It sets ablaze the hearts of those who covet what they cannot have. Qiyu feeds on the envy it ignites, growing stronger with every resentful glance. These 4 beings were not meant to walk the earth. They were calamities, each one a living testament to the worst of human nature. And so the ancient people of Paldea devised a ritual to contain them. They forged 4 great stakes, each one imbued with a sealing power, and they drove these stakes deep into the ground at the 4 corners of the region. The artifacts were bound, their energy suppressed, and the treasures of ruin were locked away from the world. But the sealing came at a cost. The king who had commissioned the artifacts did not survive the ritual. His greed had already consumed him from within. The legends say that as the last stake was driven into the earth, the king's palace crumbled, and he was buried beneath its rubble. His kingdom fell not to invaders, not to famine, but to the very power he had sought to control. It is a cautionary tale that echoes through Paldean history. Legendary power does not merely destroy others, it destroys the one who wields it, and yet the stakes remain. Scattered across the region, hidden in plains, mountains, and deserts they wait. Some say that if the stakes are ever removed, the treasures of ruin will walk again. Others whisper that the stakes are not meant to hold forever, that the hatred of humanity is patient and will eventually find a way to seep through the cracks. The 4 artifacts sleep, but they dream of the day when the seals will break. Paldea holds many mysteries, but perhaps none so intimate and unsettling as these, because the treasures of ruin are not alien, they are not cosmic, they are us. They are the grudges we hold, the violence we commit, the greed we feed, the envy we burn with, and that is why they cannot be destroyed, only sealed. But there is another legend in this land, one that tells a different story, not of human sin, but of loyalty and betrayal. A tale of an ogre who was cast out, and 3 Pokémon who followed a master's command. That story is still waiting to be told, and it hides a truth far stranger than any artifact. The last chapter left us with 4 cursed artifacts, each one a vessel for the darkest human impulses: greed, jealousy, anger, hatred. Those treasures of ruin were sealed away because their power was too dangerous, too raw to be left in the world. But the story of the Kitakami region is a different kind of cautionary tale. It is a legend that has been told for centuries, passed down from generation to generation, and like all old stories, it has been reshaped by the tellers. The truth, as it often is buried beneath layers of fear and misunderstanding. Tonight, we are going to dig through those layers and find the real story of the Ogre and the Loyal Three. The version that most people know goes like this. A fearsome ogre once terrorized the land of Kitakami. It was a creature of immense strength and rage, and it wore masks, each one granting it a different kind of power. The people were helpless. They could not fight back. But then, 3 loyal Pokémon stepped forward. They were brave and selfless, and they drove the ogre away, sacrificing their own safety to protect the village. The ogre was vanquished, and the 3 heroes were celebrated. Their statues stand in the town of Mosui to this day. The masks of the ogre were taken as trophies, kept safe by the villagers, so that the ogre could never terrorize them again. But if you look closely at the story, if you listen to the whispers of the older villagers, or read between the lines of the festival plays, you start to see cracks in the narrative. The ogre is always described as evil, but no one can quite agree on what it did. The 3 loyal ones are called heroes, but the details of their victory are vague. And the masks, those beautiful ornate masks, they are not weapons of destruction. They are something else entirely. They are the key to understanding what really happened. The truth begins with a Pokémon named Ogre. It is a small green creature, almost childlike, with a face that seems to hold an eternal sadness. Ogre was not born a monster. It was a visitor to Kitakami, a traveller from somewhere far away. It came with masks, 4 masks, each one a gift from a close friend. The masks were not tools of war. They were expressions of identity, of emotion. The teal mask was the first, given by someone Ogre loved deeply. That mask represents a bond that transcends death. It is the mask of trust, of companionship, of a promise that even when the world turns against you, you are not alone. But the people of Kitakami did not understand. They saw a stranger wearing strange masks, and they feared what they did not know. Fear turned to suspicion, and suspicion turned to hostility. Ogre tried to explain, but words could not cross the barrier of prejudice. The ogre, as they called it, was driven away, chased into the mountains, forced to hide in a cave where it would remain for centuries, waiting for someone to remember the truth. And what about the Loyal Three? The 3 Pokémon who supposedly saved the village. Their names are Okidogi, Munkidori, and Fazandipiti. In the official legend, they are heroes, but in reality, they were not acting alone. Behind them, pulling the strings, was a tiny parasitic Pokémon named Pecorant. Pecorant is a creature of greed and control, a puppet master who used the Loyal Three as its pawns. It fed them a poisonous mochi, a sweet treat that bound them to its will. Under that influence, they did not protect the village. They attacked Ogre, driven not by bravery, but by the toxic ambition of their master. They stole Ogre's masks, not to keep them safe, but to claim their power for themselves. The masks were meant to be worn by Ogre alone. They held pieces of its soul, memories of friendship and joy. When the Loyal Three took them, they corrupted those memories. The mask became twisted, reflecting the greed that had stolen them. The villagers, seeing the masks in the hands of the 3, believed the lie. They saw the masks as proof of victory, not as stolen treasures. And so the legend was rewritten. The ogre became the villain. The Loyal Three became heroes. And Pecorant, the true instigator, vanished into the shadows, its role forgotten. But the story did not end there. Ogre waited in its cave, clutching its remaining mask. The teal mask, the one that had not been taken. That mask kept the memory of its friend alive. It was a symbol of hope, of a love that could not be stolen. And in time, a trainer came. Not a hero from a legend, but someone willing to listen. Someone who looked at the ogre and saw not a monster, but a lonely Pokémon in need of a friend. And when Ogerpon finally had the chance to reclaim its masks, it did not seek revenge. It simply wanted to be whole again. The emotional weight of that journey is profound. Ogerpon was ostracized for its appearance, judged by the masks it wore, blamed for crimes it never committed. It lived in isolation for generations, watching the world celebrate its persecutors. And yet, when the truth came to light, it did not lash out. It accepted the bond offered by the trainer, the same bond it had lost so long ago. The teal mask, the mask of that lost friend, became a bridge between past and present. It proved that even when everyone else turns away, one act of kindness can undo centuries of pain. So why does this story matter? Because it shows us how easily legends can be distorted. The Kitakami myth is not unique. Every region has its own version of a misunderstood creature, a hero built on lies, a conspiracy hidden in plain sight. But Ogerpon's story is special because it offers a chance for redemption. The masks are not just artifacts. They are memories, emotions, pieces of a life that was stolen. And when we finally see the full picture, we realize that the ogre was never evil. It was just a child in a world that did not understand it. And Pecorant, the hidden puppet master, still lingers. Its influence has not been fully purged. The greedy desires it planted in the hearts of the loyal three did not vanish when the masks were returned. They fester, waiting for another opportunity. The loyal three themselves, freed from the poison, now walk a path of atonement. But the question remains: how many other legends have been shaped by a similar unseen hand? How many heroes were actually villains? And how many villains were actually victims? That is the mystery we will follow into the next chapter, where we will explore the shadows that move between the myths. The creatures that exist not in the light of recorded history, but in the dark spaces where stories are born. The mythical shadows are waiting, and they have secrets of their own. The Kitakami legend we just explored, with its masks and misunderstandings, is a story about how perception shapes history. But there are other legends, older and stranger, that have been waiting in the shadows for centuries. Some of them don't even belong to any single region. They are the ghosts of myth, the whispers that travel on the edges of recorded time. Tonight, we turn our attention to 4 such beings, each one a fragment of a truth that humanity has struggled to understand. Consider the pair that dance on the boundary between sleep and waking. Darkrai and Cresselia. Theirs is an eternal cycle, a conflict that never truly ends. Darkrai is the embodiment of nightmares, a shadowy figure that feeds on the terror of sleeping minds. It does not choose its victims. It exists as a natural force, much like a storm or a flood. But unlike a storm, Darkrai's presence is intimate. It invades the one place where you are most vulnerable, your own mind. And then there is Cresselia, the crescent moon embodied in a swan of light. She carries the power of lunar healing. Her feathers, it is said, can dispel the darkest of dreams. The two are locked in a constant opposition. One brings the dread of night, the other offers the balm of sleep restored. The cycle is not a battle in the way we think of fights. It is a rhythm, a natural pendulum. Every nightmare that Darkrai creates, Cresselia eventually soothes. And every time Cresselia brings peace, Darkrai stirs again from its shadow. Some believe that this is how the moon influences our dreams. The pull of the ocean tides is physical. The pull of the moon on the mind is emotional. Darkrai and Cresselia are the spiritual manifestations of that pull. They remind us that darkness and light are not opposites in a moral sense, but partners in a cosmic dance. Without nightmares, we would never appreciate the relief of waking. Without healing, we would drown in fear. This is their purpose, to maintain the fragile balance between terror and peace. But what about a Pokémon that represents something far more absolute? Victory itself. Victini is not a guardian of balance, it is a guarantee. According to legend, any trainer who bonds with Victini will never lose. Not that they will fight perfectly, not that they will be invincible, but that victory somehow will find a way. This is an extraordinary claim, and it sets Victini apart from every other legendary. Most mythical beings control forces of nature or embody concepts like time, space, or emotion. Victini embodies an abstract outcome. The very concept of victory is impossible to define because it depends on context. Winning a battle, winning a race, winning a heart. Yet Victini's existence suggests that victory is not just an event. It is a quality, a state of being that can be personified. The legend is tied to the Island of Liberty, where Victini supposedly resides. It radiates a gentle warmth, as if the idea of winning itself produces heat. Its name comes from the words victory and tiny, but its power is anything but small. It is said that Victini creates an infinite supply of energy within itself, a boundless optimism that refuses to admit defeat. That energy is infectious. When a trainer holds Victini, they feel as though every obstacle is surmountable, and perhaps that is the real secret. Victory is not a guarantee from the outside. It is a confidence that erupts from within. Victini simply awakens that confidence. It does not change the odds. It changes how you see them. Moving deeper into the forest of myth, we encounter a guardian whose domain is not the mind or the outcome of a contest, but the very fabric of time. Celebi is the voice of the forest. It is a small, fairy-like creature that travels through time to ensure that the future remains green. That phrase, the future remains green, is not just poetic, it is biological. Celebi's power is tied to the health of forests. It can move backwards and forwards in time, but its primary mission is to protect the natural world from destruction. If a forest is threatened, Celebi will appear, sometimes from an era thousands of years before or after, to intervene. This makes Celebi a paradox. It is both ancient and always present. It has seen the birth of civilizations and will watch their ashes scatter, but its heart belongs to the trees, the rivers, the cycles of growth and decay. Celebi does not speak in words we can understand. It communicates through the rustling of leaves, the call of birds, the pattern of falling rain. Those who have truly connected with Celebi describe a feeling of being accepted by the wilderness itself. They hear a voice that is not a language but a resonance. That voice is the forest singing its own song of survival. And if Celebi judges that a human or a force is harming that song, it will use time itself to correct the damage. It will reset, rewind, or accelerate growth to restore balance. This is why some myths say Celebi is the most dangerous of the mythical shadows. It is gentle, yes, but its gentleness is backed by the infinite patience of time. It can afford to wait until the moment is right, and then act in a way that unpredictable and absolute. On the opposite end of the spectrum, we have a being that was never born. Marjana was created. It is a Pokémon of steel and gears, a masterpiece of ancient mechanical engineering. Its story begins more than 500 years ago, in a kingdom that no longer exists. A brilliant scientist, driven by a desire to preserve life, constructed Marjana from scratch. But this was not a simple automaton. Marjana was given a soul heart, an artificial core that mimics the essence of a living being. The soul heart is the key to its existence. It is a device that absorbs the energy of others, not as a weapon, but as a means of sustaining itself. Over the centuries, Marjana has accumulated countless life forces, turning them into a reservoir of power that allows it to function almost indefinitely. This raises profound questions about what it means to be alive. Marjana can feel emotion. It forms bonds. It protects its chosen partner with fierce loyalty, and yet it was assembled from parts, programmed with a purpose. The scientist who created it poured his own hopes and fears into its design. He wanted it to be a guardian, a friend that would outlast him, and it has. But the soul heart is a burden as well as a gift. Marjana must constantly draw energy from the world around it. If it stops, it will cease to exist. This means it is perpetually dependent on the love and care of others. It is a machine that needs to be held. In a way, this makes Marjana the most human of all mythical Pokémon. It was made from loneliness, and it continues because of connection. These four shadows, Darkrai, Cresselia, Victini, Celebi, and Marjana, each represent a different corner of the mythical landscape. One is a nightmare, one is a healer, one is a promise, one is a voice of nature, and one is a miracle of engineering. But they all share a common thread. They exist at the edges of our understanding. They do not fit neatly into the categories of creation or destruction. They are not gods in the way that Arceus is. They are more like living ideas, concepts that have grown so strong that they took physical form. And as we explore the deepest mysteries of the Pokémon world, we are beginning to see a pattern. These beings are not random. They are pillars that hold up the structure of reality, and if one of them falls, the whole framework might shift. Perhaps that is why the rarest of encounters with these Pokémon feels so significant. You are not just meeting a creature, you are touching a principle of existence. Up next, we turn to a theory that changes everything. If the shadows we have just discussed are the guardians of our world, then what lies beyond them? What if there are multiple worlds, each with its own set of legends, its own rules, its own Arceus? That is the question at the heart of Chapter 27, the Multiverse Theory, and the answers may rewrite everything we thought we knew about the Pokémon universe. From the eternal dance between darkness and light, between the nightmares of Darkrai and the soothing crescent of Cresselia, we now step into something far larger, far stranger. A truth that shatters the very idea of a single reality. The Pokémon world, as we have come to understand it, is not one story. It is a web of stories, branching across timelines, dimensions, and possibilities. And the evidence has been hiding in plain sight, woven into the fabric of the games themselves. The first concrete proof came during the Delta episode, the climactic post-game story of Pokémon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. In that narrative, you, the player, are drawn into a crisis that threatens to rewrite the entire cosmos. A massive meteor hurtles toward the Hoenn region, and the usual heroes, Groudon, Kyogre, Rayquaza, are not enough. The solution lies not in power, but in perspective. The Devon Corporation, with its advanced technology, reveals that the meteor is not simply a rock from space. It is a message, a tear between worlds. And the only way to stop it is to summon a being from another dimension, a Pokémon that exists outside the boundaries of time and space. That being is Rayquaza, but not just any Rayquaza, the one from the original Ruby and Sapphire timeline, a history that had already played out in a different version of events. The Delta episode confirms what many fans had long suspected. The different versions of the Pokémon games are not alternate realities in a loose sense. They are officially acknowledged parallel timelines, each equally real, each diverging at key moments. The player character from one timeline can reach out and affect another. The boundaries between universes are thin, and they are breaking. But how do these connections work? What force, what being, can bridge the gap between dimensions? The answer lies in a mischievous, ring-obsessed Pokémon from the Kalos region. Hooper, in its ordinary form, is a small playful creature with the ability to create ring-shaped portals. These portals can teleport objects and even other Pokémon across vast distances. But when Hooper is unleashed, when it assumes its unbound form, its power escalates to cosmic proportions. The rings become doorways not just across space, but across time and reality itself. In the lore of the games and the anime, Hooper's unbound form has been shown to summon legendary Pokémon from all across history, from different timelines, from different dimensions. It can call upon Dialga, Palkia, Giratina, beings that govern the very fabric of existence, and bring them into a single, chaotic convergence. Hooper is the key that unlocks the multiverse. Every legendary you have ever encountered, every mythic beast that guards a region, every ancient force that shaped the world. They are all connected by the same network, the same cosmic web, and Hooper can tap into it at will. It is not merely a powerful legendary itself. It is the switchboard operator of the multiverse, the one Pokémon that can make every legendary story intersect. And if Hooper is the operator, then who is the caller? That is where the player comes in. The silent protagonist, the trainer who has journeyed through every region, caught every legendary, and shaped every story. There is a theory, one that the games themselves hint at, through a subtle but profound detail: the link cable. In the early generations, the only way to trade Pokémon between two games was through a physical link cable connecting two Game Boys. That cable was more than just a data transfer. In the lore, it represents the connection between two separate instances of the Pokémon world. When you trade a Pokémon from your copy of Ruby to a friend's copy of Sapphire, you are not just moving data, you are moving a living creature from one timeline to another. The link cable theory argues that the player character, by choosing which version to play, by trading and battling and completing the Pokédex, becomes an active agent in the multiverse. You are the observer who collapses possibilities, who decides which legendary appears, which story ends, which timeline remains. The games do not just tell you about parallel worlds, they make you a participant in them. Every time you press the start button, you are stepping into a new branch of reality. But not everyone who crosses between dimensions does so by choice. Some are pulled through, torn from their home timeline by forces beyond their control. These are the Fallas, a term introduced in the Alola region during the events of Pokémon Sun and Moon. When an ultra wormhole opens, it does not always lead to a Pokémon. Sometimes a human or a Pokémon from another world falls through, disoriented, lost, forever displaced. In the games, Fallas are recognized by a distinct phenomenon. Their minds are often fragmented, their memories of their own timeline, faint or conflicting, they cannot return. They are refugees of the multiverse, stranded in a reality that is not their own. Annabelle, the frontier brain from the battle frontier in Hoenn, is one such Falla. Her presence in Alola is a direct result of Ultra Space, a link between dimensions, and the Ultra Beasts themselves are Fallas of a kind. Pokémon from a different dimension, adapted to an entirely different set of physical laws, now intruding upon the world we know. The concept of the Falla adds a tragic, human dimension to the multiverse. It is not just a playground of infinite possibilities. It is a place where lives can be upended, where the fabric of identity can be torn. So the question becomes, where does this all lead? The multiverse theory of the Pokémon world is not a loose fan speculation. It is the foundation upon which so many legends are built. The creation of Arceus, the split of the original dragon, the clash between truth and ideals, the war of Kalos, the ultra space of Alola, the darkest day of Galar, the paradoxes of Paldea. Each one is a node in a vast, interconnected network of realities. And as we move toward the future, the boundaries will only become more blurred. The next chapter of this journey, Chapter 28, The Future of the Legend, will ask the most unsettling question of all. What happens when the multiverse starts to speak back? When the legends begin with themselves? But for now, let the rings of Hooper and the whispers of the Fallas linger in the quiet dark. The truth is out there, woven into the space between games, between choices, between sleep and waking, and you have been part of it all along. And so, with Hooper's rings, we saw that the boundaries between dimensions are not as solid as they seem. Every legendary, every myth, every isolated story, they are all threads in a single net stretched across time and space. But if that net is so vast, why does it keep weaving the same patterns? Think about it. Every region that has ever been mapped in the Pokémon world carries its own creation story and its own destruction myth. In Sinnoh, Arceus births the universe from a single egg, and Giratina is cast into a distorted realm for its violence. In Hoenn, Groudon and Kyogre clash until Rayquaza silences them from the sky. In Johto, a fire consumes a tower, and Ho-Oh resurrects 3 fallen Pokémon as the legendary beasts. In Unova, a single dragon splits into Reshiram and Zekrom over a war of ideals, leaving Kyurem as a frozen husk of what once was. In Kalos, an ancient weapon wipes out thousands, and Xerneas and Yveltal sleep and awaken with the cycle of life and death. In Alola, the Tapu Guardians hold the islands together, while Solgaleo and Lunala traverse dimensions. In Galar, Eternatus falls from the sky and triggers the darkest day. In Paldea, Terrapagus lies hidden in the Great Crater, its stellar energy rewriting the rules of type energy itself. The same structure repeats, A powerful being, a conflict, a disaster, a separation, a restoration. It is almost as if the very fabric of this universe is programmed to generate these stories. But why? Are the legendaries the ones who create the world? Or is the world itself creating the legendaries to explain its own existence? Perhaps the answer lies in something we often overlook: the blurring line between myth and science. For generations, legendaries were seen as untouchable gods, forces of nature that humans could only revere or pray to. But then came Mewtwo, a cloned Pokémon, born in a laboratory on an island off Kanto, built from the DNA of the mythical Mew. It was not born from a cosmic egg or a primal force. It was manufactured, raised in a tube, and given consciousness by human ambition. And it proved that the gap between the legendary and the artificial is thinner than we ever imagined. Then there is Genesect, a prehistoric Pokémon that Team Plasma resurrected and modified with a cannon on its back. Ancient life, ripped from extinction, turned into a weapon. It carries no divine mandate, no cosmic role, only the scar of human interference, and yet it possesses power that rivals the legendary. And then there is Type, Null, created by the Ether Foundation, specifically to counter the threat of Ultra Beasts, a chimera stitched together from multiple Pokémon, designed to be the ultimate weapon. It wears a mask that suppresses its power, because its creators feared what it could become if unleashed. The mask is a reminder: we are now building our own legendaries. This is the trajectory. We started with gods that shaped mountains and oceans. Then we found gods that rule time and space. Then we found gods that live in other dimensions. And now we are building gods in laboratories. The line between creator and creation, between natural and unnatural, is dissolving. So the ultimate question becomes unavoidable. Are the legendary Pokémon the creators of the world, or is the world the creator of the legendary Pokémon? Look at the patterns. In Sinnoh, the Lake Guardians, Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf are said to have given humans knowledge, emotion, and willpower, but those are human concepts. Did the Pokémon create those concepts, or did humans project them onto the Pokémon? In Unova, the original dragon split because of the twin heroes' disagreement. The dragon itself was the embodiment of their unity. When they broke, it broke. That suggests that the legendaries are not external forces imposing order on the world. They are reflections of the world's own conflicts. Even Arceus, the so-called Alpha, is only known through the stories written by ancient peoples. We have never seen the true creation event. We only have fragments, a flute, a myth, a shrine. The Pokémon themselves do not speak our language. They communicate through emotion, through battle, through the faint signals of their glowing forms. We interpret them through our own cultural lenses. So perhaps every region develops its own creation and destruction myths, because the legendary Pokémon are not fixed beings with one true story. They are malleable. They adapt to the region that discovers them. They become the story that region needs them to be, and that brings us to the deepest mystery of all. What remains undiscovered in the furthest corners of this universe? We have mapped the known regions. We have catalogued hundreds of legendary and mythical Pokémon, but there are still dim signals, ancient texts that speak of beings without names, events that do not fit the timeline. In the deepest recesses of the distortion world, beyond even Giratina's lair, there may be something else. In the void between dimensions, where Hooper's rings cannot reach, there may be a place where the original raw material of reality still exists. In the great crater of Paldea, we have only scratched the surface. Terrapagos itself may be only one piece of a larger puzzle, a stellar entity that hints at an even older system of energy that predates the 18 types. And what of the Paradox Pokémon, beings that should not exist according to linear time, yet they do? Are they from the past, the future, or are they the echoes of a timeline that never happened? If parallel universes are real, then every legendary we know may be just one version of an infinite set. Somewhere, there is a universe where Dialga and Palkia never emerged from Arceus. Somewhere, there is a universe where Mewtwo succeeded in taking over the world. Somewhere, There is a universe where the original dragon never split. The future of the legend, then, is not about finding new gods. It is about understanding that the gods have always been mirrors. We shape them as much as they shape us. Science has caught up to myth, and soon the distinction may vanish entirely. The next legendary you encounter might be one we built ourselves, or one we discover in a place where we never thought to look. The mystery is not over. It never ends. The net is still being woven, and somewhere, in the deepest corner of this universe, a thread is waiting to be pulled. What did you think of this journey? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this changed your perspective or taught you something new, consider subscribing for more mind-expanding content. And if you know someone who would find this as fascinating as you did, share it with them. These are the kind of conversations that matter.